Hello everyone, and welcome back once again to my journey through One Piece. Today we're going to be talking about Part 2 of Skypiea, the amazing, fantastic conclusion to Skypiea. This was an incredible last third or so of the arc. I can't wait to get into all the specifics, to talk about all the huge story points and the big, poetic, emotional climaxes and all the payoffs that have been set up from the saga from the start to finish. But before doing so, just a reminder that you can watch the next video on Patreon. Early access for the next video review is available on Patreon for anyone who's interested in a little something extra. You can also follow my Twitch, where we read these every single week. Every single chapter I read on One Piece will be available on Twitch, though just to clarify, they only stay on VODs for Twitch for 2 months, so there is a little bit of a restriction on that, so just make sure you get to them in a somewhat timely manner, because I don't archive them, and they are going to disappear eventually. These reviews won't, but my read-through will, so just be aware of that. You can also join the Discord if you're interested in joining our community and talking about One Piece and my journey through it, or your journey through it, or recent chapters, or other things, other media, other stories. That's always open to anyone. It isn't for patrons only or anything like that, or subs only. It's for anyone, so you can join it if you'd like. And it's also become the primary place where I put updates to my Twitch schedule, to video things, and all sorts of announcements, so follow that or join that if you'd like. Twitter's good for updates like that as well. So before talking about the arc itself, let's talk about some HAP's comments as always. These will be for the Jaya video, so these comments were in response to my video review of Jaya. ChocoCat89 says, regarding Luffy's intuition, I think you could say that it's not on point if you focus on his encounter with Bellamy. I for one had the opposite feeling when I read that scene, because Bellamy, even though an antithesis to Luffy and the crew, didn't pose a real threat to him, hence Luffy wasn't on alert. But even after what Blackbeard said about dreams, Luffy just listens, didn't become friendlier or anything. So I do think his instincts told him that this man is dangerous or has different values than himself. Luffy also quickly noted that Blackbeard is not alone, the them part, which I always interpret as a reference to the Blackbeard crew, that his and Zoro's intuition sensed that Blackbeard had crewmates with him. Another point, Zoro follows Luffy's orders, and sure, Luffy is the captain, but I strongly believe it was due to Zoro's trust in Luffy's gut feelings, and probably his own as well, since he also noticed that Blackbeard wasn't alone. The way Luffy and Zoro's relationship is shown here is beautiful, just pure trust and deep understanding of Zoro as the first mate, Luffy's right hand, you could say. For example, when he told Zoro to rescue Smoker. I wonder how the others would have reacted in the bar, but I do believe that Nami represents them, and their reactions would be similar to hers, except for Robin, who seems unfazed. For me, this highlights these two Straw Hats beautifully, who are the most vocal about their dreams, which isn't to counter what you said, but just another interpretation depending on the focus. Hope you get my point. Sorry, English is my first language. Your points are very understandable. Your English is great, no worries about that. But yeah, I'm glad to have this alternate point of view. Thanks for sharing. I do think that I wouldn't necessarily agree with the fact that Luffy was always on high alert with Bellamy and that he just didn't sense him being a threat. I can understand why people would interpret it that way, and I totally get it. But personally, I just don't find too much of that reflected in the text, and really just think he didn't think much of the situation, didn't really appraise it as something, and then just kind of got slapped in the face, so to speak. It's just the way I look at it. Who knows? Further Luffy stuff I'm sure will inform my opinion a bit more. But yeah, thanks for sharing. And I do agree about the Blackbeard stuff, about the phrasing of the they, them line. That's what I think I said in my Jaya video, that it might be referring to his crew. But yeah, the heart of this comment I totally agree with. Luffy and Zoro, their connection and their trust, and this unspoken dynamic between them, and they just have something special between them that's totally different than any other two crew members. And I do also tend to agree that the rest of the crew would have probably acted similarly to Nami, because Luffy and Zoro they are a little bit on that different plane. Maybe Sanji in the same situation may have potentially acted the same way they did, potentially, but I think pretty much everyone else would have acted similarly to Nami, which I think is really important for one, Nami's role, two, the crew and where they are in regards to Luffy and Zoro, and three, for Luffy and Zoro, because they do continue to be just a little bit different with regards to how they approach their goals. Clank says, you even mentioned this little moment in the review, and I wanted to highlight it as one of my absolute favorite moments for Usopp. When looking for the South Bird and that tarantula crawls onto Nami, she gets spooked. Sanji also gets a fright and shies away from it. Meanwhile, Usopp casually picks it up, mentioning that he used to play with spiders like it back home. He explains that if they don't scare the spider, it wouldn't bite them. He knows it isn't venomous, so even if it did bite them, no big deal. This part is a gag, but it also illustrates Usopp as a man of rational fear. Nami made a career of stealing from dangerous criminals. Sanji can kick a sea cow so hard it flips over. In the last arc, they were fighting a crime syndicate led by one of the most dangerous pirates on this side of the planet, yet this tiny spider scares them. Usopp isn't just scared of everything, he's scared of the absolutely insane things that Sanji and Zoro don't bat an eye at when Luffy gets an idea. Though still susceptible to the occasional superstition fright, though considering what the world of One Piece makes possible, maybe that isn't all that irrational, Usopp's fears are mostly grounded in reality, and that handful of panels with the spider illustrate that beautifully to me. That's a really cool examination of that scene, and I really appreciate you sharing it. Any Usopp content is content for me, so you're definitely hitting upon the right spots to get me to read these for AJPs. But no, I didn't talk too much about that scene, I just said that I kind of liked it for the reasons I said, but this is some really cool insight, and I think that it's reflective of the fact that Usopp is the crew member most grounded in reality, the most everyman, like I always say, and so it makes sense that that would apply to all facets of his character, including his fears. His fears, like you say, are grounded in reality, but if he has indications that some things are not dangerous or not worth being scared of or fearful of, he's not going to be fearful of them, whereas the rest of the crew, I feel like it might be a bit more instinctual, but yeah, really cool contrast here, and I like how you can grasp so much just out of that little moment. FP Baby says, Luffy's reaction to Blackbeard's speech has always stood out to me. Luffy is said to not have an internal monologue because he's so straightforward, he just says what he's thinking out loud. But it almost seems like he was definitely thinking something about Blackbeard in that moment that he doesn't really say. The them statement is still a mystery to this day, but I'm curious what else you think Luffy may have been thinking in that moment. Pretty much a curiosity, an appraisal, a quizzical look, perhaps at the fact that this guy who I disagreed so much with over the same things, over food and drink and whatever, seems to think the same way as me. And that fact in itself is something that raises an eyebrow, I guess you could say, but also I think it's just rare. It's rare to have this mentality on the Grand Line. We're embedded in this mentality because of Luffy and his crew, but people like that are a dime a dozen on the Grand Line who actually do act like this. You know, I'm sure there are a cavalcade of dreamers, but people who are so proud to proclaim what dreaming means and why people should dream and how they should never die. Someone that proud in a city like Mocktown in Jaya, in this age where people are so easily cynical. It's a big contrast, and I think Luffy is kind of processing that and everything else I mentioned before, because it's rare. Not even everyone on his crew thinks that way. Brandon King says, to me, some of the best moments in One Piece are when Oda challenges what we know of the story or challenges what the Straw Hats believe. My favorite idea presented in Mocktown is this idea of the Straw Hats finally being told dreams are blasphemous to have, and how Oda uses this so beautifully to validate what the Straw Hats believe through Luffy's punch on Bellamy and their subsequent pursuit of Skypiea, and how it blossoms later in Skypiea with Oda using Luffy to validate the 400-year-old dream of all Skypieans, Shandians, and Mont Blanc cricket to accept one another as friends as they once did and hear the golden bell ring once more. In what ways do you want or expect Oda to challenge our expectations for the Straw Hats or the story in general? I think I've alluded to this in the past. I don't tend to be one for just going, I specifically expect this or that, or specifically want this or that, in anything more than just saying that would be cool, or this seems like it could come to pass. I'm very much the type of reader or watcher or experiencer of stories that kind of just thinks of the story and the future events as, I'm along for this ride, this writer, I've invested myself in their world and story, and I am handing over the reins to them. They can do whatever they see fit, they can be free to do whatever they want. I don't really care if they do these things that I think would be cool, or if they do what I expect, or whatever, as long as they're carrying out their vision. So I don't have really specific things to say, apart from things I mentioned as asides here and there throughout this video series. For example, one way that I think would be really cool for the Straw Hats to be challenged is with regards to Luffy's leadership. Like I mentioned in Drum Island and I think Alabasta, Vivi definitely woke Luffy up and showed him some of the blind spots in his style of leadership and his recklessness and impulsivity. And I said, you know, maybe this has taught Luffy to learn this lesson and it's done, but I think it would be cool if future developments down the line also challenge this specifically for him, and he has to grapple with this stuff through incorporating the things that Vivi might have taught him without her being present. I think that could be really cool, but again, I'm just along for the ride. If Oda decides I don't really want to go that way, that's cool as well. Outside of that, with regards to Usopp and basically every Straw Hat, I just want their journeys to be very variable. I want there to be peaks and valleys and progressions and regressions, especially for Usopp because of all the things I say about his character and why that fits directly with him more so than basically everyone else, maybe except for Nami. Yeah, I really just want that on a general level to be an element of the storytelling of these arcs. I don't want it to be linear or even exponential. I've got more than 750 chapters to go, I think now. Long-term storytelling, long-term planning if possible. I know Oda 700 chapters ago had no idea how long this would go for, I'm sure. But I would like to see seeds being planted for things like that. Outside of that, in terms of events, I don't really care. It's all down to Oda, whatever he wants. Astute Chick says, I can't remember if you mentioned this during your review of Logtown, but I'm going to mention this here just since you remarked that Sanji being from North Blue is new information. It's indeed new information, but back in chapter 101 when they were entering the Reverse Mountain, Sanji seemed to know something about it already. And if you look at the map, it's impossible to go from North Blue to East Blue without crossing the Red Line. So Sanji must have crossed the Red Line before and hence wasn't as amused. The continuity is actually insane. That's really cool. And also, let me just quickly mention something else Astute Chick mentioned in a different comment where they say that with regards to Blackbeard and Luffy's dynamics, they don't just have different tastes, they have different tastes of the same food / drink / whatever they're talking about. And so this could key you into the fact that they may have similar ideals, dreams, that's pretty clear, but they go about in executing the way they carry out those ideals in totally different ways, totally divergent ways. So that's a cool little, allegory, I guess you could say. But yeah, back to this comment, that's true, yes. I do remember totally clocking that Sanji was acting a little bit differently in his expressions and reactions to those events and all of that. I think I talked about that in the video? I'm pretty sure, but even if not, yeah, it is something I noticed, but completely forgot about, I guess, with regards to this stuff. Thank goodness you guys are there to remind me of these sorts of things. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's cool. And also I think all these details together might be hinting at the fact that we might be getting seeds planted for another Sanji backstory. We had his backstory with Zeph. Maybe there's more to it, because there are questions unanswered and there are hints towards where he came from and how he saw the Reverse Mountain. What must that journey have been like for Sanji? I'm interested to know, and so maybe Oda's cooking up a little bit of a backstory for a different part of Sanji's life. I'd be down for that for sure. Last couple here, Mr. Ajax or Ajax says, I love how the tale of Noland seems to inform the rest of Mocktown. It's a deliberate parallel to Roger, who of course started the Grey Pirate era with his last breath, but in Jaya we see the flip side of that. The real takeaway for someone like Bellamy or the rest of the townsfolk was that following dreams like that is a fantasy and in the end gets you killed. In his defense, that's actually a pretty rational takeaway, but in refusing to give into a sense of romance, he's reached his limit in the world. I interpret his insistence on crushing Rookie's dreams is just a cope for his own cowardice. I would agree. I think I alluded to the idea that someone who acts the way Bellamy does is likely acting that way due to fear and a compensatory reaction to pain or trauma or his dreams being snuffed out in some way. And so yeah, I totally agree with this viewpoint, and I also love the idea of the parallels and inverse nature of Jaya and Noland, and then Goldie Roger, excuse me. He died and the Great Pirate Age began. He was this inspiration for dreamers like Luffy, or a spearhead at least. But Noland dies, and because of the way in which his life turned out, and the propaganda surrounding it, it signaled this era of cynicism, specifically on Jaya, and maybe from a wider span of things, a wider perspective if we're extrapolating, maybe the Grand Line in general, but specifically Jaya. And yet, Noland was very much alike to the pirate spirit that we see in our crew, in our characters and Luffy, that we've come to know throughout the series, and so the fact that it's spun like that is very sad. And we'll be talking about that throughout this video as well. Lovely little reflection and foil there between those two. There are some interesting parallels between Roger and Noland. And the last one here is from VM, who is a patron. Thank you very much. Glad to see you tackle this arc in such a thorough manner as usual. Jaya is one of my favorite arcs in the series to this day, largely because of Bellamy, which you already made excellent points for with regards to idealism and cynicism. Even just in his epithet, the hyena, plays into Jaya's theme super interestingly regarding its symbolism. How they're a despised species in most cultures, don't hesitate to cheat and steal, and originally feed off others' corpses, chasing pirates with lower bounties and lower grades than him. Alongside just an overall motif for rudeness and cowardice, how his speech comes off as very repetitive throughout Jaya. Bellamy's character is super dogmatic and fixed on the idea that a new age doesn't exist as you said, just like a hyena is included in a binary system. His thoughts are based on a Manichean? Wow, you're teaching me some new words today. Way of viewing things where he's 100% certain his values are right, so therefore that's what his identity is solely constructed on. I think he's great setup for Skypiea, as I find Jaya as a whole great, being more of a comprehensive setup for the concept of dreams. I don't often tune in frequently for reviews, but I consistently listen to these whenever I can and appreciate the dedicated time and effort that goes into sharing these experiences with your fanbase. Thank you. That last little bit's very nice to read. Words of gratitude like that, honestly, help me to continue to do these, because they are a lot of work, but they are definitely worth it. And yeah, like I said, a couple words in there that I didn't really know how to pronounce, but the way you explain things helps me get the meaning out of them, even if I didn't know them in the first place. And that's really cool. You know, obviously Bellamy is compared to a hyena, but I didn't really think about the specificity of that and the parallels, apart from his just overall demeanor, that laughing, mocking demeanor. But I really like that they're alike in more ways than just that. The scavenger nature of both hyenas and Bellamy and his pirates, the cheating nature of it. I didn't really think about it from that perspective, but that is very on point, and I really appreciate it because it does elevate him a little bit as a character. And yeah, like you say, the way in which his viewpoint of dreams is so binary and black or white and brittle. You can just sense, like we talked about earlier, the trauma or past experiences or whatever have led him to just not be able to believe and think of things as so one-mindedly. And due to him being petty and bitter and unable to see past his experiences and unable to acknowledge that things may have gone differently for other people and wanting other people to sort of join him in misery. Misery loves company, right? It's honestly very profound. Bellamy is one of the better antagonists, I think, in the series. Probably top 3 so far, and you've illustrated why in a great way. So those are all the AJP's comments for this video. Thank you so much for sending them in, and if you want to be added to the pool and to have your comment highlighted in the future, just use the hashtag AJPs. One thing to also clarify before we get into the specifics of the arc, someone pointed out to me I was speculating about the 3 powers in Jaya. A commenter called That Cringe Called Digglebaws pointed out to me that the 3 powers were introduced into the story in, I think, East Blue, and those 3 powers are the Marines, the 7 Warlords, and a third unidentified faction that, up until this point, I'm not privy to. So, thank you for pointing that out, just wanted to clarify that. I now know who the 3 powers are supposed to be, or at least 2/3 of them. So the main topic for today, Skypiea Part 2 Finale, the Climax. I talked about in Part 1 how a lot of the themes that they dwell upon, that Oda dwells upon, in the first 40 chapters that I read in Part 1, I wasn't confident that I'd be able to conclude what he was saying here with certainty without reading the climax. Now we can see a lot of those themes have been concluded and tied up, and did end up being what I essentially thought they might have been, but the way in which they were tied up was just so beyond anything I imagined or expected. You know, something important to talk about here is that we've discussed before how Skypiea is treated as filler or not conducive or contributory to the main plot, or just it can be skipped according to some people. Now, I'm not going to rag on those sort of mentalities because I think it may be overblown in my mind just because of how much I disagree with that notion, and there may not be that many people who actually think that. I don't really know. I don't dig into the fandom. I can just go off of what you guys tell me. Either way, I think it's clear that Skypiea doesn't contribute to the plot in the way that most of the arcs do, outside of Robin stuff, because there is some important Robin stuff, the Poneglyph, her dream, and how this ends up being, you know, that push forward for her, and how it informs us about the rest of the world, and the untold history of the rest of the world. That aside, this is pretty much a detour. It doesn't contribute to the main plot of any of our characters or Luffy or getting the One Piece, it's just another adventure. But while it doesn't contribute to the main plot, it is still so emblematic of everything that One Piece is. Absolutely everything. Absolutely everything in this arc is meaningful and thematically potent and links to Luffy and the crew and everything that this story stands for. It's kind of wild. With regards to the presentation, this is where I really started seeing a little bit of a discrepancy between earlier Oda art and now. Like, now you can see, this is, in my opinion, the best art Oda has put out so far. there are some magnificent spreads, some great detail, great uses of shading, as NL's lightning, for example, is used as a tool for that. Great apocalyptic landscapes, like end-of-the-world stuff, very large in scale and very horrific. But also there's the breathtaking. And people have asked me before, do I see much of a change in his art style? I think now I'm kind of getting it. If you compare these chapters, going into chapters 300 and on, I've now read more than 300 chapters. If you compare this art to his earlier stuff, it still maintains a simplicity and charm, but it's a lot more detailed, I think a lot more dynamic, a lot less rough around the edges, and more confident and dense. Like, there are panels with so much packed into them, tons of reactions from tons of different characters, extra lines here and there, not pertaining to the main dialogue, but underlying lines and reactions and things like that, usually done for humor or little character interactions. It's very dense in that way. I think you know what I'm talking about. There is a lot stuffed into these panels, and yeah, it's just denser overall. And yet I think it flows very well. I think the fights are drawn really well. I think the panel flow works. I found myself most immersed in this recent stuff compared to basically anything else in One Piece. And yeah, I think it's been a huge improvement. Stylistically, like I said, just denser, more detail, more shading, more done. Oda hasn't lost track of those little reaction panels, those tiny ones that inform you about characters' reactions to certain things. Oda hasn't lost sight of that at all, and so I think this is a lovely balance 300 chapters in between this simplicity, but making it dense and rich at the same time, and yet not disrupting the flow. This is, I think, a lovely balance, and I hope that this style is maintained throughout the rest of the read, because I think if it gets more simple, goes back to the art style of the earlier stuff, there isn't as much to grasp in terms of panel to panel, to take in. As someone like me who enjoys really looking at all aspects of the story, and, sometimes I miss it, of course, but I really appreciate that density, so I hope the density stays, but I also hope the panel flow and clarity stays as well. Because if it gets too cluttered or dense, which is an argument I've seen, or a criticism I've seen levied at the series, that could become disruptive and overwhelming. This right now, I think, is exactly the type of presentation that appeals to me, at least for One Piece, and I think it's actually the best merger of these sorts of styles to present this story. Outside of the art, though, this arc has the best flashback in the series. There's Choppers, there's Namis, there's Sanjis, there are other ones as well. This is the best one. I think it's the most powerful, the most beautifully presented, the most extensive. I think it's just a little bit more special than basically any other flashback because it's just so grand and encapsulates so much and brings it all together in such a poetic and profound way. And yet it has basis in very true, raw emotion. Very relatable themes, very relatable characters, great characters. This flashback in this climax was amazing. It recontextualizes Wiper, the whole conflict, Noland, Shandia, Kalgara, everything. And it does so much for these characters, and does so much for the story as a whole. It also fixates on the idea of progress, of progressing forward to a more prosperous world and innovating and doing what you need to benefit society and the world in general. What is progress? What actually is it? Why do people do it, like Noland? Why do people like Noland want to progress? It covers the themes of exploration tied into that, of voyages, and exploring new lands and trying to benefit the world, but it also in a very nuanced way, tackles that relationship with culture and tradition and not, spitting on past traditions and cultures and ancestors and how customs have been carried down through generations, because then you lose your sense of identity and you lose sentiment, you lose heart, and One Piece is all about heart. But at the same time, you can't remain stagnant. You can't remain focused on dogma or doctrine or customs that just don't make sense. And so there's a balance that needs to be struck between progress and tradition, and it's beautifully expanded upon through Noland and Kalgara and this arc as a whole. It continues that exploration of entrenched dogma, of negative conditioning, learned helplessness, of these cycles, and the futility of these sorts of wars and the cyclical nature of it, how these can be broken through a third party like Luffy. Very Final Fantasy X-esque, like I've talked about before. The importance of perspective, and additional perspectives to help you see clearer. Then there's also the idea of a waypoint, a fixation of hope, a lighthouse for the forlorn and stranded, and a way to welcome people back home. An abstract home, a physical home, friends, loved ones, whatever. The bell. The bell is the signal of freedom, of hope, of dreams, of connection, of love. And that improbable dream, more so than anything else, is, I think, what is baked into here through a coalescing of all those elements that I just talked about. Because togetherness between Noland and Colgara when they first met was a distant dream. It didn't feel like it was ever feasible, but Noland in particular pursued it and tried to reach understanding and tried to continue to reach out to these people, and they ended up in the end being receptive because they weren't bad people. They were just born and bred to think a certain way and needed to be snapped out of it. And so this felt like a feeble dream at first, but it came true. And the signal of the bell, the ringing of the bell, was the symbol of this connection and this dream that was achieved between the both of them. And it continues to be a symbol of dreams years and years, hundreds of years past that occurrence. That idea of we are here. You have people who care for you, who will welcome you home. And dreams, like I said, everything. It encapsulates everything. And Luffy wanted to ring it for Cricket to tell them, you weren't wrong. You were right to dream. We are here. And tacking onto that, there's this theme of understanding, how it can be reached, and compromise, and how people who have such disparate ideals and outlooks on life can come together. It's difficult, but it can happen, and that is another type of dream being achieved. Ganfer and Wiper, Shandia and Skypians, Noland and Colgara. And it also makes me wonder if this sort of understanding can be reached between two characters we currently know in the story who may be opposing. Maybe Smoker and Luffy, Smoker and the crew. We've already seen hints of Smoker, more than hints of Smoker definitely looking at the crew in a different way. Luffy and some other antagonist maybe, and reaching out for them. Could that sort of relationship happen between two characters in the story who may have seemed total opposite, or still are total opposite, but are able to reach that understanding, potentially? And then some last things I just want to bring attention to is that it's amazing how this situation came to be. It is insane. The chances for things to happen in the way they did and lead to this are incredible, because look at how Skypiea is, look how it's situated in the sky and why it's situated in the sky. The knock-up stream cutting off half the island, or whatever amount of the island it was, how there were people already living there in Skypiea, and the people on the upper yard, the Shandians, and how that led to this war, and this led to this culture, and then NL swooped in right at the opportune time to become what he became and lead things in that direction, coalescing with the previously told cultures and traditions they learned already, and how Jaya came to be in response to a lot of the things that Noland said, and how they worship these past figures. The way that things came to be this way is mind-boggling. It is a series of unbelievable coincidences, improbable things that happened. But in this world, the improbable is probable, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. The idea of balance continues as NL continues to strive for this natural place for humans to be. NL views the things I talked about, these coincidences and how things came to be this way, he views it as blasphemous, unnatural, disturbing. But there's nothing unnatural about this. This is just life. People bounce into one another in a very chaos theory-esque way. They will impact people's lives. The land, the earth, is a living being in and of itself almost. And in this world, knock-up streams can happen, emperor clouds can happen. People will live where they can, whether it be in the sky or on the ground. People will dream. None of this is unnatural. It all happened quite naturally. And so what is natural is not some arbitrary idea of where you really belong, because there is no place where people inherently belong. In this world, your home is where your home is. It's where you came to value yourself organically. And no matter where, if you spend your time with loved ones, that will be your home, and that will be what's most natural. But yeah, sorry, I guess I rambled on a little bit. Tons of themes. This arc is so dense, and those are just a handful of ideas that I got from it. With regards to the story proper, Ace continues his journey to look for Blackbeard. He goes through a bunch of adventures. He meets a woman named Moda, who's in the milk business, and he seems to inadvertently help her, reunite her with her family. They're in debt. He infiltrates a Navy base. He delivers a message to a Vice Admiral there, Vice Admiral Comil, and while he's undercover, he learns a bunch of stuff about where Blackbeard was next, and he is able to set off and go towards him. So I hope we see more of Ace in the future and see what he's going to end up doing with this information. And, I've loved him in these cover stories. I want to see him again in the main story. That would be great. But going into the story proper, just to clarify, these chapters that we're covering will be chapters 278 to 303. So where we left off, Enel essentially disposed of everyone, and Nami was all that was left, and she trepidatiously joined his crew. She said she'd join him on his ark, and she's kind of looking for a way to escape. She kind of internally debates this, and Enel gives some interesting insight to Mantra. What happens essentially, and the reason that he's able to smite people with his lightning, is that he uses his mantra to hear and listen in and eavesdrop on the conversations of people throughout Skypiea. On stream, I made the comparison here that Enel is essentially like a really, really insecure Twitter user. Like, for example, a YouTuber or a streamer that looks purposefully, searches his name in the search bar to see people talking shit about him, and then going and blocking them or something like that. I just made that comparison. I thought it was kind of funny. Meanwhile, Conus is continuing to try to spread the word of what Enel is about to do to crash Skypiea down to people in town. And she's trying to convince them, but no one believes her. Her words go on deaf ears and they just call her a blasphemer. And it really shows how deeply entrenched this dogma is once again. Enel was essentially right about fear. These people are terrified and scared to believe it, even if, deep inside their hearts they may want to. But because they just have this conditioning, this psychological terror, they cannot do anything but reject Conus. I think it's very understandable and nuanced and very admirable for Conus, but you can't entirely blame the mindset of these average people because of what they've come to know is the world. You can't fight back against this. So just concede. That's what they've been taught. But Conus, very courageous, continues to persist and just talks about Enel's plan and tears up thinking about Pagaya, who sacrificed himself to save her from lightning. I didn't think that would be a death. It ended up not being a death. I think that was pretty clear. I don't think many thought he wouldn't have survived that. But nonetheless, it's a very emotional moment for her as she thinks to him and thinks, I need to do him proud. He gifted me with this life. I need to do something with it. People are scared and they go, you're about to be smited, but nothing happens. She says, look, I'm not being struck by lightning where I stand. This god is not a god. He's just a little child. She didn't say that, but I'm just adding in my little bits there, because Enel really is of a spoiled little privileged child. But notably, she was willing to be smited if it came to that, just to get the word out, and I think that isn't something to be ignored. And she explains, I'm not being smited because he's not a god, like I just said, but also, she says, I'm small fry. The literal reason why he's not doing this is because I don't matter in the grand scheme of things right now. What matters right now to Enel is that he's crashing down Skypiea, so why does he care about petty things like this right now? So evacuate, get the hell out of here. And she mentions the soldier, the dad of that kid who ended up dying delivering that message, and she goes, you guys have to believe me, think for yourself, but people are just too scared to do this. No one acts up, no one is the first to stand forward. And when people stand forward in situations like this, step forward, it causes a lot of people to be encouraged to step forward themselves. But they just kind of stand here hoping for some sort of miracle, that the sky crashing right in front of their eyes won't happen because they're gonna pray. And Conus continues to try to convince them. And I think right here, it's a very nuanced topic here. I don't think that Oda is necessarily criticizing religion itself as much as criticizing an over-reliance on it. I think Oda in general tends to criticize extremes of lots of things. Extreme impulsivity for Luffy, for example. Extreme overthinking at times for characters like Nami or Usopp. Here, people are extremely over-reliant on religion and use it as a crutch. That isn't the way to live. Religion can be used to empower in a really important way, and I think there's examples of that throughout the arc, but you should never have it be your be-all and end-all, because it isn't meant to be. It's meant to be a supplement to your life, to help you feel a part of something, to be empowered. But it can't be everything, so much so that you lose your backbone and just hope for miracles to get yourself out of situations. That's not the way to live. Conus realizes this, and she's trying to convince these people of it, and it's a very profound moment in that way. A huge theme of Skypiea that's kind of dwelt upon here. And I spent a lot of time talking about this relatively short scene, but that's because I think it's that important. We then cut to Robin, who is very injured, but she's conscious, and the crew around her are unconscious, and she says, I've got to save them, I've got to at least get them to higher ground, which is notable. Robin, who has been on the outside looking in, doing this, wanting to do this for her crewmates, wanting to save them. Is that a spark of a will to live? Is that a spark of connection? There's something here, and Robin is definitely growing more and more as a part of the crew. Meanwhile, Luffy finally catches up to NL in a great, awesome spread, and then just says, "What did you do to my crew?" And he's ready to rumble. Back with Konis, she finally is able to turn the tide and convince people a little bit with some help of McKinley. I've been talking about in the previous video how McKinley, some lines here and there, kind of alluded to the fact that there's more to him than meets the eye. It turns out that he was unwillingly part of NL's operation, or was a bit of a covert agent and undercover a little bit, and didn't want or agree with his ideals, but had to be there to ensure that people didn't get as hurt as they could have been. He says that he knows the true nature of NL. He says that he doesn't want a tragedy to be repeated similar to what happened on an island called Burka 6 years ago when NL kind of came into prominence. This was the island that NL was born and raised, and it was a place that disappeared without a trace. But then McKinley explains a little bit more about the specificity of Ganfur's soldiers who were taken in, or kidnapped, or whatever, however you want to put it. He says that they were taken in, they were unwillingly sort of captives, but they defected and joined in because they view NL as invincible. Again, dogma, conditioning, they just didn't view any way out of this. And they told themselves, like he says they kind of lied to themselves, that in working from the inside, they would be able to buffer NL's impact and protect the public as much as possible as they could from their limited means. They wanted to try to enforce this dogma and exacerbate it to prevent NL from killing people. But what ended up happening is it just spiraled more and more and entrenched people deeper and deeper into this dogma to the point where they can't even live for themselves. Everyone's living in fear. The society becomes what it becomes, and he says, we lost sight of ourselves. We were convincing ourselves of this. So this is a really important viewpoint, I think, into the warriors of Ganfurs that defected, for lack of a better term. And I think a very important bit of insight into the conflict. The more perspectives into a situation like this, as long as it doesn't become bloated, the better, because these are very gray situations. And this elevated McKinley a ton as a character, because he's ashamed of all this, but then, when it really matters, he steps up and he says to Konis, I will help you evacuate everyone. Let's do it. Then we go back with Luffy. Luffy tells NL he's a disgrace of a god, and something that I kind of realized right here, or maybe a chapter or two before this, in my streams I kind of said, hold up, NL is someone who uses lightning. Luffy is a rubber man. That is a hard counter to lightning. And that could really signify thematically, symbolically, that Luffy is a hard counter to NL. He is his worst enemy, his worst nightmare. And I think that is kind of really indirectly cool for what Luffy represents towards NL. NL isn't as much of a thematic antithesis as like Bellamy or Sir Crocodile, but the fact that Luffy is a hard counter in this way and nullifies him is, I think, very meaningful. But it leads to this hilarious face from NL as he realizes, holy shit, this guy's rubber. One of the funniest expressions in the entire series, and in a way that I don't think really breaks tone for the reasons I've talked about previously with Luffy in these really intense sequences where things get a bit lighter. And Nami looks on and realizes, yeah, Luffy is his natural enemy. And this was either in the dialogue or the SBS or something, but it said somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, that Paramethea or Mythia users, Paramethea Devil Fruit users, like Luffy, like Sir Croc, like NL, I believe, are people who eat a devil fruit who retain their original shape. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's what it said, but that's another bit of detail for types of devil fruits. But similar to the fight with Sir Crocodile when Luffy realized the weakness that Sir Crocodile had, that he was weak to water and was able to exploit that, you know, even when you get this weakness or become their natural enemy in one way or another, NL/Sir Crocodile are still formidable. They can still overpower Luffy with their skills, their power, their just overall expertise, and, you know, they're not scrubs. They're fearsome opponents, and they're antagonists, prime antagonists for these gigantic, sprawling arcs for a reason. And NL is very clever in being able to use his lightning in other ways to get at Luffy in this fight. Teleporting, heating things up, things like that. Really pretty clever. Then there's a scene that's another parallel between NL and Sir Crocodile, as NL kind of pins Luffy down, pins him back, and says not to get cocky. It very much reminded me of when Sir Crocodile had impaled Luffy and said, "People like you are a dime a dozen" on the Grand Line. Enel transforms his staff into a trident and goes, "I think sharp objects are probably your weak point." Luffy goes, "Yeah?" And then Nami goes, "Why the hell did you tell him that?" Just a nice bit of humor. But it really quickly switches back as Enel tells Luffy, "You're just in time to witness the destruction. You got a front row seat." This whole time, Isa, who obviously is there as well with Pierre, is yelling for Luffy, is very desperate for him to be okay. The ship starts floating to depart for the Endless Verth, or the Fairy Verth, whatever it is. Nami starts panicking, and Luffy can sort of intuitively sense that she is panicking before she makes it more obvious and asks him and tells him, hurry. And she's very desperate and very panicky. And she's going, "Luffy, what do we do? We gotta hurry. What's going on?" And Luffy just simply says, "Quit your worrying. You're a crew member of the future king of the pirates. Stop looking so pathetic." It's a little bit of tough love, and I like it because it's again another bit of a grappling point for Nami, as she is in this tug and war with believing in Luffy, but also regressing to her old habits and the person she is at heart. It's not easy to believe in Luffy and believe in dreams and believe in the improbable or impossible the way that Luffy and Zoro, particularly Luffy in this situation, do. This is something that has been established from the beginning, but has been dwelt upon in a really deliberate way since Jaya. Nami still consistently isn't quite as much of a believer with Luffy. She questions him a little bit. She goes, can I really believe in this way? And it continues here, and Luffy just tells her, "Stop, quit this. You look pathetic." Tough love. Interestingly, Enel overhears this and says, "Oh, you're king of the pirates? Of which kingdom?" And Luffy says, "King of the majestic oceans of the world." And Enel says, "That's impressive. Let's finish our business." It's very epic. It's very, it sets the stage. It gets you really hyped to read more. And I found it interesting that Enel there doesn't scoff at Luffy's dream there. He doesn't say that, you can't, that's a dream that's beyond you. Or he doesn't say, there's no way you're king of all the oceans of the world, or whatever it is he said. He says, "Nice, okay." He acknowledges his kingship, unlike other people like Wapol or Sir Crocodile, or Bellamy. Perhaps that could be because he himself has a dream. Enel is not like Bellamy in that he does seem to have this dream for this natural fairy Verth, endless Verth. Interestingly enough, for this saga and arc, series, whatever you want to call it, where so many of the antagonistic forces or antagonistic themes are dwelt upon the idea of cynicism and not being able to dream, Enel isn't really a non-dreamer. He has dreams, and he acknowledges Luffy's dreams, and he doesn't shut them down. He's just an obstacle because he is this very spoiled god, potentially lonely, potentially fearful. We'll see. We'll talk about that later, but I find that contrast interesting. He isn't a thematic antithesis, really. He's just in the way. He's just got this god complex. But this is apocalyptic. There is a rumbling, there's just calamity everywhere. Enel says the final act of the arc, departing, and Skypiea descending, it started, and he calls this Deathpiea. Deathpiea, not the most creative name. There's a bit of an AJ piece element to that. I think he can do a little bit better than that, but who am I to talk? And Pierre is kind of, itching to get to help Luffy. But what's interesting is that Isa tells him, "No, don't do that. This is a battle between a blue sea warrior and a cloud sea warrior." Or I don't know if she calls Enel a warrior, but nonetheless she refers to Luffy as one. And she says, "It does not do to interrupt a warrior's battle." That's very similar, in my opinion, to Luffy stopping those two comrades of theirs, I forget their names, Johnny, that could be totally wrong, I don't know, but stopping them from getting at the Mihawk-Zoro fight. This is a battle between warriors. Do not encroach upon it, or else you're disrespecting them, specifically Zoro, and then Luffy in this case from Isa. So a bit of a kinship between Isa and Luffy there, which is interesting because Luffy didn't tell her about that. She didn't witness Luffy do that. She just kind of came to it independently. But Enel is trying to eliminate the entire kingdom with lightning. McKinley continues the evacuation. Conus then says, continue with this. I need to go help my friends. I need to help them escape or get out of here. She's referring to the crew, obviously. And the Luffy-Enel fight continues. It's pretty humorous. Luffy is struggling a little bit in a lighthearted sort of way. Enel notes that he doesn't have mantra, which makes it more difficult for him. I do wonder if he'll eventually be able to wield it. I mean, Zoro, I still hypothesize that Zoro can. Maybe Luffy will be able to eventually. But he's having a hard time with the fight. So the arc lifts up, it continues to lift up, and Enel and Luffy continue to fight, and we eventually get to a point where NL starts speechifying, talking a lot of gusto and a lot of bluster, and he talks about how he wants people to worship him. He keeps restating that he's the kami, he deserves worship and love and adoration, and he is above everyone. And it's here where I started thinking about more deeply about the lonely god concept with regards to NL. He is, again, another one of those seemingly, I don't know if he's actually insecure, but he does a lot of things that an insecure person would do, and acts in a compensatory sort of way outwardly, in that he talks a lot about how he's above everyone and how they should worship him, and it really makes me feel he wants adoration. He wants reverence. And does he want this due to loneliness for some reason? I don't know. The lonely god archetype or concept has been tackled in a lot of media. This isn't anything new. I've seen it in things like Xenoblade Chronicles or Gridman, things like that. And he's got a lot of similar sort of concepts. So I'm not saying necessarily that this means that he is an archetype of the lonely god, maybe not, but that is something that could be indicative of that. But outside of the arc, it's pandemonium. Skypiea is falling down, the sky is falling down. Robin looks at the arc and as it's ascending and looks on it with great curiosity, and she's definitely interested, but it's pandemonium everywhere else. Citizens are just screaming and crying and hoping for this miracle, and eventually NL sticks a huge golden ball to Luffy and throws him overboard, saying that he needs Luffy gone so that he can be the strongest one and that he can essentially do his godhood stuff unopposed. This shows, again, respect for Luffy. He says that I can't be God with you here, saying that Luffy is a thorn in his side, so interesting bit of respect again. But in response to that, Luffy says, there are plenty more like me who can defeat you. I'm not the only one who can defeat you. There are plenty people like me on the Grand Line or in the sea. And that is like a really cool twisted inverse of what Sir Crocodile told him. People like you are a dime a dozen on the Grand Line. Luffy is essentially saying the same thing, or something very similar, but turning it on its head a little bit to use it combatively. And he humbles himself here a little bit by saying, yeah, I'm not special, which is something that he said before in the story, but interesting that he reiterates it here. Isa and Pierre try to go to save Luffy, Konis continues to rush to meet the crew, and then NL, once Luffy is thrown overboard, turns to Nami and says, you should join me now. You should not deprive yourself of something you want, because he will give her all the power in the world and she'll have access to whatever she wants if she joins his crew. And this is really interesting because it's an inverse of the Arlong situation, where Nami joined him unhappy. She says that there are lots of things in the world that she wants, lots of material things, and more abstract things, but if she had to join NL to get them, she doesn't want to do it. She would rather be with the crew not succeeding than to be away from them succeeding. So that is a huge change in her character, and I think it's really important and really worth noting, and again, another big moment for Nami and her development and connection with the crew, and the way she views the world and interacts with the world, and how she views life. It's just, this arc continues to develop Nami in a really, really impressive way. You know, in Jaya, Nami couldn't really see things from Luffy's perspective, but coming into Skypiea, she saw lots of new things that helped her to entrance herself and immerse herself in the joy of this adventure like a lot of her crewmates were able to, like Luffy was able to. She discovered the waiver, she discovered these new and insane and interesting things, she met new people, and this is an adventure that I think hits a little bit different for her, due to it being in response to the things she experienced in Jaya and her specific role in all of this, and how she looks at Luffy's dream as she questions things. She's able to immerse herself in this, and she realizes that Luffy's attitude was validated, you know, or more so she understands where Luffy comes from in wanting to do this, in wanting to check out these adventures and believing in these things. And I think that really plays a role here and continues to later on, because she isn't at an end point at all whatsoever. It's an ongoing process, as it should be. But yeah, it's just a really great stuff for Nami. Meanwhile, Konis finally makes her way over to where the rest of the crew were, and she tries to go and treat Sanji and Usopp. Both of them are now gone, and the last panel of this chapter we get is them climbing up on a rope up the arc. From here, Nami actually confronts NL and intends to fight him to try to escape, and she gets saved in a second, but the fact that she intended to do this in the first place is very significant. Nami is one who tends to be kind of like Usopp, one who runs away from confrontation, especially ones with a far superior foe. But just like Usopp, she is growing in courage and conviction and being able to stand for herself. And this is different from her fight against Miss Doublefinger, where she was an underdog there. Here she is totally outclassed, and going up against NL means certain defeat, because of just the monumental task that's in front of her. But Usopp and Sanji, like I said, are climbing on the arc to try and save Nami, and Sanji is essentially the one who is gunning for this. Like, he has immense courage here to try and save her, and I think that's worth noting, because Yaz is simping, obviously. Everyone has their thoughts on that, but what I think is clear is he genuinely does care a lot for the crew, and specifically in this case Nami, because we saw how far he went, the lengths to which he went in Drum Island for her when she was sick. He went with Luffy and Nami to try get a doctor for her, and he was essentially more driven than Luffy in the first part of that journey. He inspired Luffy himself, and again here he's fighting tooth and nail to try and save her. As hell rains down all across Skypiea, these two essentially confront NL, and what ends up happening is Usopp is basically distracting him, running away, doing the Usopp stuff, something that's very complimentary to his character and very loyal to the person he is, while Sanji is on the inside of the arc, screwing with the gears and the levers and the mechanics of the arc. Meanwhile, Luffy finds Isa after he's thrown off and says that he's gonna climb up the giant jack to get to NL once more. But yeah, during this fight, Usopp and Sanji are carrying out their plans. I like about this plan that it really complements both characters in different ways, because you might have expected Sanji to confront NL and, save the damsel in distress, and Usopp to screw around with the gears inside, but they actually switch roles a little bit here, and it's still very fitting. Usopp running away, distracting, that's very him. Him and Nami have some cute little moments with them both being cowards, and I say that very endearingly. They both have courage, like I said, and Usopp is bumbling and, stumbling around and running around, but he has courage, immense courage to carry out this job. And then Sanji makes himself known, very determined, confronts with immense rawness, I guess you could say, and essentially says to NL that he will not get his way, in a way very different than Usopp, but just as important as one another. Like, both approaches are so essential here, as they both put themselves out there to defend, their sister. Well, Sanji doesn't quite look at her that way, but you get what I mean. And then Sanji, in response to seeing NL, just goes, "I was thinking I needed a light." Cigarette, NL being lightning, really cool. And then it was here that someone in chat actually said something very interesting about NL's design. They said, Cheroset from chat said, "Some cool mythology behind the NL design. Long ears mean enlightenment in Buddhism, but the drums are a part of his body in Shintoist thinking, reflecting different elements of the human soul, including greed with his lust for gold and a number of other references, showing that despite his insistence of being enlightened and a god, he is a false god with all the same flaws as the people he lords over," which is really cool symbolically, is not something I would have been able to get on my own, so thank you very much for that. And it very much applies to that lonely god feeling. He has the same flaws, the same fears as those he lords over. We know he's a false god, but this symbolism also is kind of coalesces with that as well, with that human element to him. We cut to Isa right before Luffy's about to go up, and she says here, "Is Skypiea gonna fall? Is my home gonna be destroyed? Am I going to lose the place I love?" And she says this with such earnest emotion and tears in her eyes, and it's heartbreaking for this little girl to face the prospect of losing her home. And this just invigorates Luffy even more to try to stop NL. Luffy ends up leaving Isa with the Straw Hats. NL tries to fix his ship, and, the evacuation continues. And as Luffy goes to try to pursue NL towards the Golden Bell, NL starts this gigantic thunderstorm over Sky Island, and there are just lightning bolts just coming down multiple throughout the land, and it is an amazing spread. It looks deeply apocalyptic, it's so dramatic, cataclysmic, there's hellfire raining down, and there's an interesting contrast. I think the lightning bolts are sort of drawn with ink brush. They're very bold and very rough in that way, to contrast like the trees of the land it's being smited down upon. The trees are drawn with very deliberate shading, very nuanced, very thin lines, but then the lightning is done with these I think it's Inkbrush. Either way, very bold, very simplistic and rough and raw to contrast it, which was a very effective contrast. And then from here we begin the best flashback in the series up until this point. I alluded to it earlier, but this is where it starts in chapter 286, right when Enel starts raining this genuine hellfire upon Skypiea. And this is where we get the second part of the chief's story from what he was telling Wiper. And what he essentially tells him is that Kalgara had a friend. He had someone that he could confide in. And so Wiper, reflecting back on this, is what stimulates this flashback. That goes back 400 years in history. And it begins in a very dramatic fairy tale-esque way, as it's being said through Nolan's words, essentially. Said through his journal of tales and stories and whatever. And so we open up to Kalgara, who is defending his island from explorers. He is just super rough around the edges. He is just almost animalistic in the way he looks and acts, and he just defeats this crew of explorers, burns their ship. He's extremely primal. And the first time we're introduced to him, we see him with his tongue sticking out in a way that was so similar to Bellamy the hyena, who was introduced to us with that being basically the primary aspect to his character. So I immediately thought, and was theorizing throughout this whole backstory, is Kalgara actually the ancestor of Bellamy? And could Kalgara, who comes to, obviously, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, to understand the beauty of dreams, be his ancestor, and the contrast between that and what Bellamy became, and the fact that Cricket's ancestor was actually good friends with him, good friends with Kalgara, I mean, that could be really complex storytelling and great stuff for Bellamy. But, I was promptly told by my chat, that doesn't actually make sense logistically, logically, that isn't how the bloodlines worked out, and I was thinking hard overhead there, and I was promptly told, that's a stupid idea, that does not work, but thematically, it would have been sick. We're also introduced here to contrast Kalgara and his primal fire, rough around the edges. We see Noland, who is shown to be a good leader, a strong man. Notably, we see tales and propaganda of Nolan throughout when we see the history of him in previous chapters. And we see that in those chapters, he was shown through this propaganda to be very small, very skinny. But here we see that Noland is a beast of a man. He's very muscular, broad, tall. He defeats a sea monster to defend his crew. And not only to defend them, he defeats it. It's a sea king, excuse me. He defeats it to feed his crew. And so we're shown two men here who are total different, opposite energies. One very much cerebral, I guess you could say, very much seems to be empathetic and open-minded and that sort of energy, and that is Noland. And then on the other hand, we have that unrelenting, untamed, fiery spirit, that rawness and kind of a little bit of a blind spot tunnel vision, as we're going to see with Kalgara. And they're total opposites in a few ways, but they intersect in one specific way, and that is through their desire to protect their home / their crew. They're both men of togetherness and camaraderie. So then we see that Nolan's crew, Nolan's a botanist. He is an exploratory adventurer, so to speak. He goes to different islands and seems to cultivate life there and explore and discover things and progress science rather, through these explorations. He is one of those revolutionary minds that, history has shown that we need to progress things. And he was this famous explorer. And we knew that much already, but the specifics here are really interesting. And so his crew are kind of out on the sea near Jaya, and they hear this beautiful bell, and Noland hears it and is just mesmerized by the beautiful sound. And this is the bell of Shandora that apparently, as we've been told, started the war between the Skypeans and the Shandians, excuse me. And they're on this voyage, him and his crew, they reflect one another, they both love nature, they both love exploring, they're both intelligent, they both progress things. And in this way, while they're not the classic image of pirates, or even the image of pirates we get through One Piece, they are the image of pirates in spirit. They are the soul, One Piece's soul of pirates. Voyage, adventure, progress. Progression can be very multidimensional and broad of a term, and I think it applies here. I think it applies to Luffy, I think it applies to people like Goldie Roger, I think it applies here. So Noland journeys onto Jaya and finds that the people here are infected with a tree disease, a tree plague. It's called tree fever. But those in Jaya, throughout culture, tradition, history, believe that they're being cursed by an evil spirit, and that anyone who gets this disease, is cursed, and it's essentially over for them. We see a very disturbing image of this as a man named Seto, or a kid, I think he was younger here, gets infected with the disease and just tries to cut away at it, dispel it from his body through scratching it off with a rock. It's very disturbing. And so you get the idea that these people have this ingrained idea of what this curse is, and it makes sense. It's something that people who lack that knowledge would come to think of these sorts of things, this sort of disease. Seto passes out, but the crew discover him and end up treating it, and they realize that it's tree fever. Then what ends up happening is the village, the Shandians, end up wanting to sacrifice a girl named Moose, who needs to be sacrificed to the Lord Kashigami. And we see that this lord, this god that they're sacrificing her to, looks a lot like the snake we see in present time, the snake that Luffy was inside. And so Kalgara approves of this. They take her to the altar that we've seen in the present day, and she's about to be sacrificed and eaten by this god, this serpent, but Noland swoops in right at the nick of time and saves her from it. He cuts the head off Kashigami, literally slays a god from their perception. But what's interesting from his perception is knowledge essentially tells him that this is no god, this is just a gigantic creature. These people, their customs, it has no basis in something that needs to be done. And so knowledge here ends up being a little bit of a theme, the importance of knowledge, the importance of science, and like I mentioned before, how it intersects with culture and beliefs and tradition. We see here the benefits of this. Their culture that's been ingrained is so antithetical to what life should be, but they don't know this. They don't know any better because that's just how they've grown. They've grown up. That's just what they know. And Nolan here is that extra perspective to offer them a viewpoint and teach them where they've gone wrong, in a similar way that Luffy and crew are able to do for the Skypiea conflict. But naturally, with this sort of entrenched dogma, it's not easy for the people of this land who have grown up this way to accept it. And so they are repulsed by it at first. They believe this is what needs to be done, and they believe that slaying this god in this way is blasphemous and they'll be cursed for it. And Kalgara confronts Noland, upset and enraged by this, as Noland has Moose in his arms as she's crying into his arms. And you really feel for her as she's about to be the sacrifice, but she's saved here. And this is the first time this fated friendship, partnership, whatever you want to call it, this is the first time they met. This is where their fated meeting begins. This is a chapter of a lot of firsts, you know? This is the first time Noland fell in love with the bell. This is the first time he came and sort of threw a wrench in all those traditions, and it's the first time where these two met. So after Noland slays this god, he begins to confront Kalgara, who is deeply upset about this, like I mentioned. He wants retribution from Noland for killing their god, which is interesting because he really reflects Wiper in this moment. Wiper, who wants retribution for a lot of things, some of which get revealed in this flashback, but here he's embodied by Wiper. And it's interesting that this is the version of Kalgara we see prior to his enlightenment and prior to him tempering himself and learning and becoming mature. And the fact that Wiper is reflective of him then shows that Wiper is not thinking clearly. Some neat parallels there. The two fight a little bit, and then Kalgara kind of entices Moose like, you have to kill yourself, tells her to commit suicide to appease the gods. It's so deeply entrenched here that he's doing this in the midst of this, and Nolan berates her for it, totally criticizes her for it, calls her a fool, says, what are you doing? And while he's doing this, he gets impaled by Kalgara's spear. Nolan then drops some knowledge on him. He says that their island is being infected by this plague, this tree fever. He says he understands the cause of it, he can understand the cure for it, he can cure it potentially. Just let him do it, and if he can, promise him no more sacrifices like this, because there is this scientific explanation for this. There is no need to sacrifice. And you really see here, it's really nailed home. Noland is this outer perspective to change the minds of people who are just so entrenched and tunnel-visioned. One of the primary themes of this arc. And so Kalgara begrudgingly agrees, something deep inside him really just reaches out. There is no hope, and he goes, if there is a chance that this guy could be correct, even if he doesn't believe it, I'll take it. And so he supervises Noland as he searches for this tree that's going to be the antidote for this. And this is an encapsulation of progress. This is why progress is essential for understanding, for knowledge, for helping so that people do not get stuck in these cycles that are harmful and perpetuated for no reason other than a lack of knowledge and ignorance, and thinking, assuming that this is what is needed. And it ties in really beautifully with the theme of exploration, adventure, voyages, and that is emblematic of so much of what the crew, what Luffy do. Skypiea is essentially this adventure, as told to us by Cricket, but for the series as a whole, it is, in large part, the soul of a pirate is to yearn for this adventure. And progression, like I said, can be broad. It can be societal progression, it can be progression for oneself, progression towards one's dream, and I think it's all encapsulating. I think it's personified by Luffy, I think it's personified by Goldie Roger, and by Noland here. And I think it's really essential to One Piece and this arc in particular. Now, Noland continues to search for this tree, for this cure and everything, and he's criticizing Kalgara here and there, and Kalgara eventually says, I am not heartless. What we're doing is not heartless, because Noland would consistently accuse him of doing that. And he says, Moose was my daughter. So he ended up having to send his own daughter to the altar for sacrifice. No matter how much it pained him, no matter how much he didn't want to do it, he just assumed it was a foregone conclusion that he had to do this. That's how entrenched this dogma is. Meanwhile, the citizens of Shandia are getting ready to execute Noland's men despite the agreement deadline having yet to pass. We have a run-in with the child of the former god, another serpent, and eventually Noland says something really interesting, which is that God's sacrifices are the result of human weakness and selfishness. And he says that humans and their fear and their selfishness and their weakness, some of the things that Enel talked about earlier, are the reason that you depend so much on this god. And he says this tree fever is not from a god, it's a genuine disease. Noland screams at Kalgara saying that your ways stop progress, they buffer progress, and we need progress to continue forward. And he says to Kalgara, implores to Kalgara, I will save this village. Don't be afraid of gods. And this is enough to reach through to Kalgara and say, okay, and he saves him from the snake. In the end, we get a tiny bit of a time skip, and we see that Noland ended up saving everyone through getting the cure. And it was implemented, and it saved all the people who had the disease or the fever. And there's this sort of montage, integrated montage of all this healing and celebrations, and Moose and Kalgara are hugging, he's crying, tears of joy that he didn't have to sacrifice her. People are celebrating. It's a beautiful little montage, and it shows the beauty in this sort of sentiment that Noland has, and all that he stands for. And people are celebrating and partying, and it's a direct callback to the spread of the Straw Hats partying with the wolves 20-something chapters ago, 30 chapters, whatever it was. And we see that this is timeless, this is evergreen, this connection between people, between all living creatures, this connection is possible, and it is beautiful, and this is the result of it. And in the end, Noland is healed, and he's happy and satisfied, and things are going well. So a little bit of time goes by, and then we see the grandchild of Kashigami, the grandchild of the snake that was killed by Noland. And this is the snake who had that mournful cry. This is the snake that Luffy was inside its stomach. This is the one that's been with us this whole time. And so I was kind of wondering, this is the one, or is this the one? What happens here? This cannot end well. I mean, we know what happens to Noland, but this just compounds it, because that mournful cry still haunted me however many chapters later. But Kalgara and Noland become fast friends. In a lot of ways, opposites attract, but they do have, like I said, that key similarity of, valuing connection, valuing the people that you want to protect, and valuing home. And eventually, Kalgara takes Noland to the golden city of Shandora, El Dorado. This is how Noland discovered the City of Gold. Then Noland sees the bell, the beautiful bell that he's been hearing out at sea. Then we see the poneglyph near the bell, the thing that Robin's been looking for this whole time. Her salvation, her dream, her new lease on life, potentially. Kalgara tells the rest of the crew, you guys can extend your stay here. We'll welcome you guys. It's great hospitality, and him and Noland begin to bond even more. And Noland ends up bringing pumpkins to Jaya. And this kind of keys you into why Wiper was upset before, when Ganfer told him, I too love the taste of pumpkin juice, because the pumpkins were this symbol, this peace offering, this emblem of this connection between Noland and Calgara. And Gan first suggested it, talked about pumpkin juice and this symbol of their connection when their homeland is gone. Like, how can you want to make bygones be bygones when all this stuff has happened to us as a result of your ancestors and, from his perspective, you? Like, you cannot... It's entitlement from Wiper's perspective. That's why he's so angry about it. And also, it just brings back those feelings of rage for what they lost. It's a blow to his pride and his people's pride. It fixes nothing. They're just empty words and empty sentiments to him. And it does nothing to fix the situation that's been brought about. It's kind of like an insult. But coming back to the actual flashback, we then see another montage. Beautiful, beautiful scenes. Again, more connections, more joy. Lots of relationships being formed and strengthened. And in the midst of it, we have this beautiful sunset as Noland and Calgara kind of cheers to their friendship, their connection, all this beauty. No dialogue needed. It's beautifully illustrated through just pictures and illustrations, just what all of this means to them, these two, the two sets of people, and just how beautiful this relationship is. However, a month later, I believe it was a month, the Shandians in Calgara suddenly seem to be looking at Noland with anger. Calgara reverts to this rage. He says he wants to kill Noland, and so just sends him away. Just get out of here. And Noland doesn't really understand what's going on, but he goes, if that's their will, I guess we gotta follow it, so we'll leave in a few days. Finish our work, and then let's leave. So Noland is getting ready to leave and set sail, but in the midst of this, we see through Moose the real deal, what's going on here, and why there is this miscommunication, and why there's this tension that's erupted between both sides. What happened is that the reason the Shandians are upset is because the souls of their ancestors are said to dwell in the trees that are on their island. But Noland has been chopping them down, and so obviously that is an insult. It's almost like they're spitting upon their ancestors and their spirit and what they stand for, and you understand why they're mad about that. That is their tradition, that's their culture, and Noland has disrespected it in their eyes. However, Moose tells people on his crew about this, and they tell her those trees are long dead. They were diseased, and keeping them there would have led to widespread disaster. And so both sides eventually learn of this. Noland realizes his mistake and says, you know what we did without properly communicating what we were doing, and even just the act of doing it alone, it was disrespectful, and we understand why they're upset. I was wrong. He accepts blame. Calgara realizes that what they were doing was in service of the whole island and to make sure that everyone was healthy and happy, and he just didn't know what those trees represented. And so he says, I'm wrong for assuming so much and not seeing the bigger picture. And both men have reasons to be, upset at the short-sightedness of the other. But in the end, what do? They accept the blame and accept their mistakes, and they humble themselves for the sake of progress and for the sake of connection. They are able to bridge the gap between their differences and understand one another and let go of their ego for the sake of something bigger. And what I love about this is, Calgara represents tradition, religion to a certain degree, culture, ingrained customs. Calgara represents all of that, tradition. Noland represents sort of scientific progress and innovation. And what I love about this is that Oda doesn't pick a side. He doesn't say that, yes, it ends up that science is right, or that this culture or tradition is right. Both sides were wrong because they overstepped and or were a little tunnel-visioned or didn't try to see the other's perspective. And both sides took the blame and came together once again. So it's a very nuanced and balanced take on that. Some might say it's straddling the fence. I just think it's a really empathetic way of telling this sort of story. But they realize this a little too late, or Calgara does, as Noland is setting off, and so he rushes towards him to go and try to yell to him to tell him that the bell will ring for him every day until he returns. And there's this beautiful spread as there's this goodbye. I'm getting a little swept up in it just thinking about it, as these two fated friends who are destined, if there is a destiny in One Piece, it definitely applies to Noland and Calgara. Destined to meet, destined to bond, destined to fill the holes in one another's lives. And they say farewell here. Not goodbye, they say farewell. And it's said that the ringing of the bell is a sign that we are here. the Shandians are here, will be here, and we are welcoming you home. It's like a waypoint, like a lighthouse, like a beacon for the lost, for the forlorn, that comfort that no matter where you go, you will always have a home with us. You'll always have a place to go where you're loved, where you have friends. This is your home as much as it is ours, and we will ring the bell for you to symbolize that. Every day, without fail, we will ring it to remind you that this is your home, this bond we have between one another. It can't be broken by anything, and yeah, it's deeply emotional. So it means we're here, and all that encompasses that. And Calgara says he'll ring it every day waiting for their return. And they promise to meet each other again, both of them, tears streaming down their face. Noland eventually makes his way back to his kingdom. He shares his tales of his exploits, he tells them about his adventures, but the king of this kingdom ends up being greedy. We kind of know where the story goes, and he says, we gotta go explore, we gotta go plunder this place and get this stuff for ourselves. He's greedy, and so he tells Noland, you'll be accompanied by a group of sailors of my own choosing. Noland cannot choose his own crew. That in itself is a bit of a red flag. And Noland eventually returns back to Jaya with the king, with his men, but literally half the island is just gone, or a decent portion of the island is just gone. What had happened is that it had been shot up the knock-up stream prior to them returning, and these two fated friends who had this love for each other cannot see one another. Now, there are lots of nuances about this that I'll get into in a second, but just the fact that goodbye between the two was their last one is desperately sad, and so Noland is said to be executed by the king. Executed for lies, treason, wasting resources, whatever. And he's executed publicly, just like Goldie Roger. His crew are watching on, knowing that what's been said about him is not true, and they're heartbroken. They're witnessing this horrific tragedy before their eyes. Make no mistake about it, One Piece is idealistic, and more often than not at the ends of arcs, our crew are triumphant. But this story itself is a tragedy. There is no reprieve, there is no happy ending. Noland died crying and wondering what happened to his friend. Because all this is going on around him, he's about to be executed, but all he can think about is his worry about where his friend is. Where are you, my friend? He needs them to be safe. And he thinks desperately, ring for me the light of Shandora. And Noland repeats to the crowd, to everyone, that he saw this golden place. And all these fake plants give testimony that this is all a lie. And Noland is to be beheaded. And while this happens, the crowd chants liar to him. And this is the story we know about. And now we see the reason why he was crying while he was being executed. It wasn't because they didn't believe him. It wasn't because he was about to die. It was because of worry for his dear friend and what's happened to him. And he dies not knowing if he's alright. And that is honestly the saddest outcome that could have been possible there, realistically. We then go back a year, because there's been multiple years that have gone by since Noland went back home and all this happened, and we go to Jaya, and they continue to ring the bell all the time for Noland to come home. It's a tradition of theirs. And we see that the snake, the grandchild of the Kashigami, is named Nola. This snake that's been with us from, early on in the arc, its name is Nola, named after Noland, by Calgara, I assume. It's just too much. It's so beautifully sad. But what happens here is that the lucky coincidence, we talked about how Luffy and the crew need some crazy luck to be able to go up to Skypiea. The knock-up stream, the Emperor Cloud has to be going by, everything, all that I talked about has to happen for Luffy to get there. So that applies directly to Jaya, and they, just like the way in which Luffy was fated, almost lucky to be able to make his way onto Skypiea, making his own luck in a sense, they were desperately unlucky because this natural phenomenon that's so rare happened, and it caused them to shoot up into Skypiea, and they ended up joining the Upper Yard or becoming part of the Upper Yard, and the Sky people who lived there sought out their land. They drove the Shandians out. War ensued. Calgara fought to defend their home, and we know what happened there. They were defeated. And just like Noland dies worrying about his friend, Calgara fights to the death the same way. And in the midst of this, as he's defending his home, he thinks purely about Noland. He thinks, we made a promise, didn't we? That we would meet again. And he just begs internally, please wait for me. I'll be there to tell you that we're right here. Your home is here. We've never left you. And interspersed with this, we have We really see them bonding as friends, the times they shared together, and it's so emotional. And he gives an update internally. He says, the village has thrived, the crops grew, the pumpkins and everything. My daughter, Moose, has married Seto. And he says, let's meet again, we have to share these stories, we have to see each other. And then he just thinks and screams, bring back the light of Shandora. These two friends, hoping against hope, desperately, and not having their hope fulfilled, that they'd be able to ring that bell again and see one another. And that is what the bell represents. That dream. That improbable dream. This was the improbable dream for these two. The idea that they'd be able to see each other again despite what happened to both of them. It's an inherited will. Wiper inherits this will. Cricket inherits this will to an extent. Luffy, in spirit, is a spearhead for this will. And that's what this bell is. This desperate hope to be together again, to see one another. And it wasn't achieved for them, but maybe those who inherit their will and who share that spirit will be able to do it in the future. And we see now that Ganfer's wish for Wiper and the Shandians to have togetherness with the Sky People and him, it's not done out of ill intent, but they are just so hurt and betrayed over years and years of persecution and oppression and what happened to their home in the first place. It isn't fair. They're just so hurt, and so they can't accept this. Wiper needs retribution. They can't trust them. And so here that parallel comes to mind. Roger and Noland were executed in very similar ways, but Roger's death in Logtown started this great new age and was like a rallying cry for kindred spirits, and that's kind of represented by Logtown, this town of ends and beginnings and prologues and epilogues for him, for Luffy, for different eras. While that happened there, Noland died, wondering if his friend was okay, fearing the worst, being called a liar, ushering in through his death and his the stifling of his will, this age of cynicism. So much so that this place was called Mocktown. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't think that really matters. It totally represents what happened to Noland. And the contrast with Goldie Roger is clear. Totally different fortunes, but such similarities within their characters. And so there are some interesting ideas here as well. If you look at it from a sort of realism standpoint, this was pointed out to me in chat, I believe, the king who Noland brought to Jaya would likely have kind of pilfered Jaya and attacked the Shandians and squeezed out riches from them for all they're worth. He would likely have invaded and maybe killed everyone. So even though it was very unlikely what happened to them, and very unlucky in that way, there is maybe a little bit of a silver lining. Maybe the king would have done something far worse. It's hard to say, but I do love that there is that nuance there. And you could also think about Noland. Was it the smartest idea to tell them about this and say, yeah, I'll take you to this place, when his king was so clearly greedy? Add some flaws to Noland, some layers, which I do appreciate. Human flaws being added to characters, never a bad thing, and I don't think that it undercuts what Noland represents at all. So the flashback's almost done here, and we see this story being told to a child Wiper by the chief. This is what was told to him. And here, a lot of these feelings are the origin of why he just needs to stop NL here. And he asks the elder, or the chief, you know, I know what happened to Noland, but if we ring the bell again, do you think he'd be able to hear it? It's just a beautiful sentiment, and this essentially is the crux of why Wiper's doing what he does. Obviously he's hurt, he wants revenge, but also deeply buried within this, deeply embedded, is this desire to simply carry on his ancestors' legacy and inherit their will, and reach out to these lost souls. I don't know if there's an afterlife in One Piece. I have no idea. Maybe that'll be dwelt upon later. But I would like to hear that at the end of this arc, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, they were able to hear it when the bell finally chimed again. I think that would be beautiful. Back to the present though, NL continues his destruction. He's just raising hell upon everywhere, and then he goes for the golden bell. Luffy continues to ride the giant jack to climb up it. Nami is close by. These two are going for this final confrontation. And what I find interesting is that now knowing the history of the bell and what it represents, it's kind of ironic that NL is going after it. Again, maybe reinforcing this guy, he's unintentionally going after this symbol of togetherness and connection between people. And a dream, obviously, but this in particular applied to him, that kind of nails home the lonely god theme, I think. And it just kind of dawned on me this chapter, 293 I believe it was, just the ways in which this world came to be, the imagination that Oda must have to craft a saga like this. It's insane. Anything man can imagine is a possibility in reality. And so many things happen in this Skypiea arc and Jaya that you would assume could only happen in your wildest dreams, but they do happen. And as big an indicator of anything of how Nolan changed things around for the Shandians, those people who used to worship gods, Nolan changed them so much. And of course there are also lots of other permutations and variables as to why they act this way, but nonetheless, look at them now. They actively strive to kill gods, like, consistently, spearheaded by Wiper. Look at how they were before. They were indoctrinated before. And so Nolan changes the history of this tribe of people, of generations to come, simply through his connection, kindness, compassion, progress, hope for a better future, his empathy, all the things that the story advocates, all of these things. It advocates for heart, for togetherness, for connection, for compassion, for empathy. And Nolan used all this to change history back then. And if it can be changed back then, it can be changed again here. And what better symbol for this than Luffy? Luffy tries to get up to Enel, who's trying to find the bell. Enel kind of beats him down, and then Luffy sees Nami, and she says, "We have to get out of here. Enel is decimating everything. We have to escape." Of course, thinking of life. Crazy spread again, super apocalyptic. It is hellfire. Islands are decimated. This is end times. And Konus, in the midst of this, despite the tremors and everything, tries to get to the group to get them back home. And that's again that idea of guiding people, of a waypoint. Konus herself kind of represents the "I'm here, I'll be here" idea through being there for the Straw Hats. And so Nami tells Luffy we have to go, but Luffy says no. And she says the gold doesn't matter anymore. The treasure doesn't matter, which is funny. Interesting development, Nami saying herself, ironic, saying that the treasure doesn't matter. But Luffy says no, I have to keep going because El Dorado existed. It was just in the sky and Cricket didn't know where to get it. And so he wants to ring the bell to show Cricket that he was right to believe, that his dream exists, that it's real, that this world does reward those people, the people who are brave enough to dream. The fact that this bell exists, the fact that Skypiea exists, all of this is a triumph for dreamers, and Luffy wants Cricket to know. It's all that he stands for, so he will ring it, and he cannot let Enel desecrate this. Wiper wants to ring it for Nolan, for his ancestors, how he inherits this will. Luffy wants to do the same thing for Cricket, and it's beautiful how perfectly it reflects that, with Luffy not knowing any of this history. It's just, there are people of this spirit that just spring up, and they change history. People like Noland, people like Luffy, people like Goldie Roger. And it's a little bit of sentiment and heart over reason, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And Luffy, in embodying this, it is one of the best Luffy moments. He just wants people to be able to hope, and to tell them, it's okay. This world may be cynical, but you can hope. You can dream, no matter what anyone else may tell you. Luffy is so good. So Enel is laughing at all this destruction that's going on. Luffy eventually reaches him, and Luffy keeps chasing him. He keeps pursuing, and he just keeps thinking of Cricket and of the brothers, and how he wants them to know that this exists. And it's like, who in the world, in the middle of this apocalypse with hellfire raining down everywhere, lightning, storms, people dying, your life at risk, everything you stand for at risk, who in the world would think of Cricket at this moment in time, that I need to show him that he can dream? That's Luffy in a nutshell, that he would think of this at that moment. Cricket is teetering, he hasn't given into cynicism, and he does have dreams and he does hope, but he's been doing it, he's been at it for 10 years or whatever, however long it is, and he hasn't been rewarded, so Luffy wants to reward him. Enel eventually finds the bell, and he thinks with glee about how this ushered in 400 years of fighting, just totally not getting it. Not getting what the bell represents, I should say. And Luffy and Nami send a message on a giant leaf down to the crew to tell them to get the beanstalk to lean westward. This will build a bridge using the beanstalk to get Luffy to be able to get to the Ark. And the crew below, Zoro, Usopp, everyone, they just go, okay, at this moment, we just gotta have faith in Luffy and Nami, and we gotta do what they say. And so they go, okay, we'll hit it westward. Meanwhile, Luffy and Nami are seeing what's going on all around them, as Luffy wants to pursue him and go up the stalk. And Luffy, when he's about to leave to go to Enel, says, "Don't you want to get away?" And she says, "No, you're stupid. I can't rely on you to get yourself home safe, so I need to be here for you to give you a ride on this waiver." I love it. They do have a special connection, those two. And this is an immense showing of courage from her. She has come quite a bit of a way. You know, in the past, I'm sure she would have run away from this, but now she not only wants to be there for Luffy to help him escape and help him survive, that speaks for itself, but she is here wanting him to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is to prove that dreams are worth having and having his confidence in them. She herself wants to believe like he can, and so she wants him to succeed, of course, so there's a little bit of an element of that as well. And she is supporting Luffy here in the way only she can, planning ahead, thinking logistically, thinking about the escape route. It's just beautiful, and it really shows how she's grown. Before, she didn't dare to hope for something like this. Now look at her. And it was pointed out to me here, something about Enel. He's not a marine, he's not a pirate, he doesn't have any real obligation. He's just this guy. He's just this random guy with a god complex who, you know, let's be clear, he's competent. He stumbled into power because of him being competent, but is just so disconnected from everything around him and is just living life in the way he sees fit with no ties. Zoro attacks the beanstalk and cuts it in half, but there are two little vines, and he only cuts one of them in half, so it doesn't fall yet. In the meantime, Enel says this is the final kingdom come, the deliverance, that will take us into this new fairyverse. Then Nola gets a flashback. Zoro's hit by lightning, so he's out of commission, so he can't fully cut the beanstalk. And Nola, in this flashback, passed out all the way back from the previous chapters. She thinks back to Kalgara and Seto and all the Shandians and all the people that she grew up with, and she thinks about how they would ring the bell and how lovely it would be if Noland were to come back. And particularly she thinks of Kalgara and Seto and how they loved ringing the bell, and she sees them walking away from her in this dreamscape, because obviously we know what happens to them, and she's all alone here. And it's heartbreaking for her as she sees them essentially leaving her spiritually. That's what she's lost. And to honor them, Nola ends up hitting the beanstalk herself. She wakes up and she does this to ring the bell. Through those memories that she saw, this is what she knows that she needs to do. And this leans the beanstalk a bit more, but it still needs a tiny bit more to properly form that bridge. And Usopp says that he can do it, but Wiper stands up on his own, and he says, "I'll be the one." And he does this because Robin tells him here about the tale of the explorer who saw the Golden City, and we know what happened to him. And she mentions his descendant who is risking his life and dreaming forever of this city, of this hope. And she says that Luffy has inherited this will to try to make this possible. The Golden City does exist, and Wiper wonders, why are outsiders so invested in this quarrel? Like, I have to be the one to ring the bell, not this other people, because it's my job, it's my tradition, I'm one of these people. But Robin really lays it out to him. Luffy is waving the flag for all dreamers. Are you going to support him? Because that's what we're all gunning for. Luffy is this romantic fool, she says. Even when things look hopeless, he would not ever think of escaping. And she says he's crazy, but there's this very endearing look in her eyes, and you can tell she very much cares for Luffy. Or even more like she's entranced by him. And Wiper asks her, what is the descendant's name? And she says Mont Blanc Cricket. And he realizes that he's Nolan's ancestor, and he gets it. It all clicks. He understands here that none of this matters, these squabbles, these fights, this resentment. All that matters here is an advocation and an achievement of dreams succeeding. And then Wiper gets it, and he pushes Usopp aside, and he uses his projectile to hit the beanstalk. And I love that it's a mix of Nola and Wiper and the crew with Zoro to knock it over finally. There's some good stuff here for Usopp trying to help him and saying that he'll take this duty on and being courageous in this way. Some great stuff for Robin as she talks about Luffy, and you see this look in her eyes as she's so captivated by him, and as Luffy is showing her this beautiful way of living. But Wiper is the star here. He puts his life on the line for this dream. He finally gets it, and he kind of lets go of everything that held him back before, which is not an easy thing to do, not when it's festered for so long. And then Luffy in the meantime, agrees with Nami. He says, okay, are you sure? And she says, yeah. And she goes, but I haven't used the waiver at this speed yet. And he goes, it's fine. And he trusts her, shows his confidence for entrusting his life with her. Both of their lives are in one another's hands to an extent here, and it's quite beautiful. And it all comes together, it coalesces, and everyone is gunning for this. It's just so moving at this point in the story, as everyone just wants Luffy to succeed here. He holds all their dreams on his shoulders, as they want dreams to succeed. They want to be rewarded. They want to be shown that dreaming and idealism is viable in this sort of world. Wiper then yells to NL and says that it's useless. You can do what you like, but you can never shatter the pride of the warriors of Shandora. Their strength endures everywhere, throughout time, throughout bloodlines. No matter the forest he burns or the lands he crumbles, those people, these proud people, will not be deterred. The earth will not lose. And Wiper here, what changes it for him is that he realizes that 400-year-old wish can still be achieved. So Robin, essentially, 2 arcs now, Alabasta and now this one, plays an essential role in turning the tide for Luffy and his crew. Where Wiper was misled was he was so caught up in bitterness and revenge and a lust for this retribution that he tried to ring the bell alone, but this is something that needed to be done together. It's a symbol of connection. And Ganfor in this moment realizes how he was misled this whole time, because he says to himself and thinks to himself, the Verth is magnificent, it's miraculous. How could we lay claim to it and say that it's ours? We never had a right to claim it. And he says, why could we not see this for the past 400 years? And just like it was with Noland and Caldara, all the way back with regards to the cutting of the trees, here both sides realize their mistake and blame themselves and don't really blame the other side. Wiper realizes that he was too narrow-minded and tunnel-visioned, and Ganfor realizes that he was too proud. He shouldn't have assumed that this land was theirs to defend in the first place. Both sides realize they're not infallible and they come to an understanding, and this connection is essentially what comprises the last act of this arc. It's poetic. Humans will be flawed, they will give in to fear, and they will do some bad things, but there's always a chance. They can still, at the end of the day, strive past whatever holds them back to understand one another, to take someone's hand, just as Noland and Kalgara did. It's an example to us all. And Luffy ends up continuing to fight NL, stopping him with the golden ball that he attached to his arm or his hand or whatever that's still a part of him. And this is amazing. It's so sweeping. It's all so integrative, as we have McKinley, citizens, Conus, the crew, everyone, Shandians, Skypeans, everyone, essentially praying, a great deal of them praying for this miracle, for Luffy to defeat their god. And someone tells McKinley as he's saying this that it's pointless to hope. But McKinley says, I don't need a point. As a human, he simply wishes for a miracle. It's what his heart pleads for. And Conus at the same time wishes, one of my favorite lines in the series, she wishes, and she thinks, she wonders if gods exist. And she says, if they do, please, please save them. Protect everyone from NL. And right as Conus thinks, please let the sun shine, Luffy disperses the clouds, and the sun does shine. Luffy himself being the sun to an extent. And I love the way this mirrors or foils Alabasta, contrasts it, because what signaled the end of the war there and the blossoming hope? Clouds, the rain, and this drought ending. But here, the rain and storms and lightning all symbolize doom in Skypiea, and the opposite happens. The rain ends, the sun shines, and the conflict is so close to being resolved. And then everyone, these chapters, needless to say, these are some of the best chapters in the series. I think my favorite stretch of chapters yet. I think it's magnificent. It's masterful, these chapters. It's insane. And Wiper just belts out, screams it. At this point, everyone is just pouring themselves, begging for Luffy to do this. And Luffy takes all the responsibilities on his shoulders and just grins, and is happy to see this duty through to the end, to represent all dreamers and tell them that they can proudly dream. And so Wiper at this moment just belts out, screams, do it, Straw Hat, ring the light of Shandora. And then Ganfor at the same time says, let us hear it, boy, let us hear the song of the island. They both have the same dream, and this light is their hope, this bell is their hope, their dream for Ganfor, for Wiper, and how they contrast one another, and how they can come together. And for this arc, it's very important for the plot, but it represents all dreamers just in general. It's so much bigger than just this arc, and that's part of why I say this arc is so consequential to the rest of the series. And Usopp is being Luffy's cheerleader on the ground, just yelling for him and screaming for him and supporting him. And Luffy has no doubt, like I said, he takes on this responsibility smiling. NL says that ringing the bell will not lead to the end of the fight, and Luffy just continuously defies him. He says he's just sick of this god talk. What use is a god who can't save his people? Which again connects to Alabasta, Drum Island. What good is a ruler who has no heart, right? And the fight continues, and Luffy thinks of the broken dreams of Isa as she's losing her home. He thinks of Konus's pain. He thinks of Cricket. And then he continuously tries to attack Enel, and he says, "You're doing this again?" Enel says that. And Luffy goes, "Yes, until the bell rings." And it reminds me of when Crocodile said, "You're gonna continue just doing the same thing over and over?" And Luffy said, "Yes." That persistence. That is Luffy. And then poetically, we hear Kalgara's words to Noland. Just wait a little longer for us, and we'll tell you that we're all okay and we're here. And as Wiper and Isa and Konus and the citizens and Ganfer, they all look on and pray. All their hopes are on Luffy. And then we flash back to Noland, who talks about Jaya and how wondrous it is and the connections he made and how great it was. And then we see Cricket, who talks once again, right back what he said in Jaya about this being a grand adventure. No one can say that Skypiea doesn't exist, and that's why it's this grand adventure. Spreads, amazing spreads everywhere, and Luffy just screams out, "Reach!" And then he thinks to himself, "Hey mister, can you hear it? We found El Dorado. For the last 400 years, El Dorado was in the sky." And he reaches it, and he rings it, and the ivy that's around the bell that kind of rusted it together breaks. And as that breaks, it's so satisfying because you can just feel the embedded dogma and the cynicism just being completely torn apart as Luffy breaks this ivy. And then the bell rings, and it signals hope and dreams for the lost, for the forlorn, for those who live and those who died long ago. And just in general, it just rings. And then we have the second spread, this negative space, as we see just Luffy ringing the bell, this wide shot of him ringing it just in the sky. And we see a clang, and the song echoes everywhere. And Luffy screams, "Reach!" And he says, "We found it. El Dorado is real." And the crew hear it and they marvel at his ability to have done it. Isa looks up in awe. Ganfer's crying. He always believed, like he said this from the beginning, he always believed that this day would come and that the fighting would end. He said this earlier on. He believed that it would come. And it did. His hope, once again, his idealism, is rewarded. And the Shandian chief hears this and he thinks to Kalgara, asking if he could hear it, because the light of Shandora shines again. And Wiper thinks to himself, "Do you hear it, Noland?" Back from when he was a child, he held this dream for Noland to hear it. I'm getting emotional again. And Wiper says, "We kept you waiting, but here you go. Here it is. Hopefully your descendants can hear it." Nola is joyous, it's beautiful, and I'd like to think that they can hear it, like I said before. I don't know about an afterlife, I don't know about any of that stuff, but wherever they are, I really hope that Noland and Kalgara can hear it. And I think they can. And below, Cricket and the brothers hear it, back on Jaya. And they go, "You hear that?" And Cricket says it sounds like a great adventure. Pirate spirit, dreams, adventure, it all coalesces here. And then one of the best, if not the best twist in the series so far. We have here, it's explained. Sorry, I just have to read it. We see here that it's explained as Cricket kind of monologues. He says, if there was a person up in the sky, if there was a place up in the sky that existed, their shadow would be cast from so high up to so far down below that they would appear to be giants. And so that's the origin of those angelic figures we saw all that time ago, those giant shadow silhouettes that we saw at the beginning of Jaya. That's the origin of it. I completely forgot about it, and it comes back in the most magnificent way. The foreshadowing there is unbelievable, and the proof that Skypiea existed was right in front of their eyes. They just needed to look at it the right way. One could say that for the whole situation. And Cricket is delighted that Noland wasn't a liar, that his dream is okay, and we get to one of the best spreads in the series, right up there with the bar scene from Jaya and the hand scene from Alabasta. Maybe my favorite. It's so close, as we see a joyous Luffy, a silhouette of Luffy jumping, larger than life, showing himself to all these dreamers and telling them, look, he reaches out to all those below who dare to dream, and they say thank you. And this brings closure to all the stories we've come to know through the Jaya arc, the Skypiea arc, everything. Beautiful. And Luffy is the core of this. He was able to take in and take on the dreams of everyone and see the cynicism and be confident and steadfast nonetheless, and take on the dreams of people who were not as unwavering as him, and going, I'll show you guys. I'll show you that you're okay. It's fine. It is more than all right to dream. And he doesn't want to do this for reward. He just does this because it's what he stands for. It's what he looks for in the world. It's what he wants the world to be. And the world bends to this man's will. Those on the ground may mock you, but you're not wrong to believe. I'm sorry I keep saying this, but it's just the way it's executed in this arc is unbelievable. And this is why I say that One Piece is idealistic. It always comes round, and it always ends up having this sort of message. An advocation of dreams, an advocation of idealism, of belief, of hope. And then Cricket cries, so glad that they're okay. Very similar to sort of Noland wanting to know that the Shandians were okay, that Wiper was okay, Kalgara, and vice versa. And Enel falls to the earth, no longer a god, as Luffy drags him down to earth. Height is used here to great effect, but yeah, Luffy does it. We have this beautiful last, line here, or series of lines. Let me just read it. The journey of the slumbering floating island was long, but its distant memories were hard to forget. Once, its people entrusted words to the sound of that bell. They believed in the power of the bell to carry the song to the farthest reaches of the sea. And then we see flashbacks to them discovering Skypiea existed in the first place. It seems so long ago. And a flashback of Cricket saying, I'm glad to have met you. And then Luffy says, it rang. And Nami says, yeah. And he says, do you think they heard it? The old guy and everybody? And Nami says, I'm sure they did. And then it ends with a quote, we're right here, as everyone celebrates and the crew look on. In the aftermath, Rocky brings Isa her treasure. Rocky's okay, the Verth. Isa tears up. The Shandians are okay, people get up. The crew heals Wiper. Wiper ends up being okay. Chopper heals him. Robin is very contemplative and reflective, but the crew is reunited, Conus is with them, she carries out her promise, and they reflect on Pagaya sadly, talking about how the old man sacrificed himself. To this moment, I still was pretty sure that he'd be alive, and he was, because he funnily just inserts himself into a panel going, reminiscing about that old man. And they go, what? We're talking about you. And he goes, excuse me for surviving. But what happened is he fell down to a lower level of the Cloud Sea after being struck. He was always going to survive. I wasn't surprised about this. But beautifully, Ganver reunites with some of the soldiers he lost 6 years ago. And the question's brought up. Can a rift of 400 years be mended, even if the god is gone, the kami is gone? And then we cut to Enel, who is nonetheless continuing on with his dream. He tells everyone that God cannot be defeated, or he talks to himself, and that he'll return one day. Very ominous. And he says that he won't let anyone accompany him to the moon because he's the only one worthy, as his arc heads for the moon. And so Enel ended up achieving this dream of the fairy Verth. He did go to the moon here, and it's a very ominous little hook because he's clearly going to come back into the story somehow. And so Enel actually emphasizes these themes as well. His dream comes true. And someone in chat pointed out that this arc starts out, or Jaya starts out, with the idea of going to a city in the clouds being impossible, and it ends with a bigger impossibility, going to the moon, being shown to be very possible. But back with Wiper, he wakes up and he's told that there is peace and everything's resolved. For the first time, no one wants to fight, and they share this home, the Skypeans and the Shandians. And this is what's natural, this togetherness, this connection. It happened in the past, and this is what happens here. And there's a beautiful third spread of a party here as people celebrate. The war being over. Luffy parties, the whole crew does. It's a celebration of life, dreams, connection, everything. And I think it's really good because Oda spends a lot of time criticizing certain aspects of these religions or cultures or how people think about them and can become dependent or narrow-minded. But he also shows the beauty of these traditions, through the bell and through how it can result in sort of this tenderness, this connection. To me, it's this idea that extremes are bad, but common cause and sentiment and heart will rise above all. So after all this, Luffy says to his crew, let's steal some gold for ourselves. We're pirates after all. So they prepare to actually do that, and then we go with Robin, and she reflects a bit. Excuse me, I'll be looking at my notes a bit more because there's quite a bit here that I want to make sure I talk about. She reflects here about how she wishes she could have seen more of the poneglyphs, more info from them from the ruins. And so Robin is with the Shandians who are moving the bell that was discovered. And they're moving it with the help of the Skypeans and the Shandians together, which is, again, beautiful. But the bell is revealed to have the poneglyph on it to Robin, and she reads that there's an ancient weapon bearing the name of the god Poseidon. She deciphers the poneglyph and explains that there's some connection between poneglyphs. She then says that Shandian's battle for the protection of the poneglyph, to protect it, was won, and Goldie Roger discovered it, and he knew how to read them, and so he continued it forward. And Ganfer says that he remembered Goldie Roger's coming 20 years prior, so this was the pirate he knew. So now she knows for sure that these poneglyphs connect to a real text and coalesce, and this is part of that truth. And so she knows that Goldie Roger brought these words to its desired location, and this means that the Shandians' job is done. They figure out here their job is done. There's no need to fight or defend or protect. This specifically. And the chief cries, saying, "We did it. It was okay. It's fine." And we see on Alabasta, we see here, there are generations of people who try their best to hide the secrets of the poneglyph. So what must it contain? It is these secrets. I really can't wait for whatever reveal it is, and neither can Robin. But Robin decides here that she will continue to read the poneglyphs and take them to the destination of Raftel, to read them along all the way to Raftel at the end of the Grand Line. So here, for the first time, she has a reason, or the first time since forfeiting her life, she has a reason to live. The crew's likely heading there as well, so that's a happy coincidence, but here she has a new lease on life. She still isn't quite 100% a part of the crew in the way that every other crew member is, and she hasn't 100% realized why life is worth living, but this is a huge step, and it gives her impetus to want to live. Impetus for hope, something to live for. Robin then goes to the Straw Hats, and the Shandians are there, and the crew are running away. The Shandians came offering gifts, and the crew are running away, and they're going, "Don't they want our gifts? Our compensation for what they did? Their reward?" And Robin just laughs, and she just goes, "Maybe they don't want it anymore." And pirates to the end, the Straw Hats run away. And a very interesting note here is that Ganfer says that Luffy reminds him of Roger and asks if they're related. Robin says his full name to him, and he notes the D, and he's shocked, and he says Roger and Luffy have the same initial here. And he says maybe the D is why they're so similar, the will of D. Keeps coming up. I really want to know the specifics behind this, but I think there's lots of subtext pertaining to what I've talked about before, a commonality between people who share that name. But I really want to know, I really wanted to explain for sure. Eventually. And then Robin replies that the connection between them might be another lost part of history, so could that connect to the poneglyph somehow? But Ganfer and the others are sad that Luffy and them left. They think that they don't understand their gratitude. In a really cute scene, Rocky is cutting Isa's hair and says that she wants to be like Luffy when she grows up because he's like her hero. And she's kind of a spitting image of him with her haircut, and it's really adorable. Luffy inspires these young generations to dream, and she already had some commonalities with him, not encroaching upon a duel between warriors, etc. But Wiper sits in front of Kalgara's statue, and he says, "We did our job. The duty was fulfilled." And he says, "The fighting's done, but we will not lose the pride of Shandora, or of Shandia, and the light of Shandora will never be extinguished." Ganfer, reluctantly, is elected to become Kami again, great man for the job, and the crew are departing from Skypiea, and they're waving bye to Konis, and they're going, "See ya, thank you for everything, whatever," and Konis says, "Be careful on the drop." And they go, "Huh?" A great page turn, you turn it, and then they fall straight down, and even the Going Mary's face is like, "What the hell? What am I doing?" But Konis then sends a big octopus balloon thing to ease their fall and act as a parachute, and the bell rings to send off the people's saviors. The Straw Hats help so many people, and they just go on and don't expect rewards, steal at times, but it's just really moving how often they benefit these people whose lands they stop in for a little bit, and then go off on their way. They help so many lives, and in reaction to the bell, there are all these beautiful reactions from the crew. This was a detour, but for all the reasons we've talked about, it is so important to everything that One Piece is. absolutely essential. It's an encapsulation of One Piece, of the pirate spirit, of adventure, of dreams, of who Luffy is, of what he stands for, of the overall tone of the series, and why Oda continuously portrays this tone, and how hard it can be. Through Jaya, it's shown how hard it can be to hold on to optimism in a world like this. But through Skypiea, we see why people persist and continue to do it. And Luffy validates that, shows them why hope is so essential. This is why he is the way he is, because things like this can happen. And then once again, beautiful narration. Let me just say it out loud. The sky that you see when you look up on a whim, is it a dream? Is it real? The country of the Kami above the clouds, 10,000 meters up in the distant far sky. If you listen closely, you can hear the sound of a bell. It's ringing today. It will ring again tomorrow. The sound of the bell echoing through the sky sings the praises of this wandering land as the crew go back down to their sea. That is where the arc officially ends, but I read one more chapter for the sake of this video, 303. The Sadayama brothers talk about this revelation and what they learned, and then Cricket tells them, okay, what adventure do we chase next? And they go, wherever you say, boss, we follow you wherever you go. Now we cut to Jaya in Mocktown, where Bellamy and Sarkis are having a fight against each other, but we see that they're actually being forced and controlled to fight against each other. And we see that their leader is one of the 7 warlords, the man who we know can control people through his power to some degree, Doflamingo. And we see here that the symbol that was drawn upon the tree by Bellamy was not actually his symbol. It was the symbol of Doflamingo. And he says it's a shame that it was used to fight against foolish dreams about a city in the sky. And Bellamy begs his forgiveness, and Sarkis is forced to attack him, and he's kind of snuffed out. And I don't know if he's dead, but we'll see. Maybe it'll be confirmed in the future. I'm not exactly sure. But Doflamingo then says this is this new age where only worthy pirates exist, and people who are trash will be dismissed and abandoned. It's very sadistic, very theatrical, nice for building on Doflamingo from what we already know about him, and continues to build intrigue, and I want to know more about him. The crew land in the water thanks to the octopus. Nami is very take charge. You see she's very engaged and empowered, I think, by what she saw, and you can really feel it in her characterization and personality here. She believes a little bit more than she did prior to Skypiea, and I love that for her. That's what I was kind of hoping for this arc. For her to learn, for her faith in Luffy to be shaken a little bit, but then ultimately strengthened. And she takes charge, and Luffy says to go to the next island. The other people are complaining, but she goes, come on, you gone soft? And they start heading towards the next island. And a nice little detail is that they test out the waivers and the dials, and they still work in the Blue Sea, so they can still use them. That's good. And they kind of debate about what they should use the gold they have now for. And they ultimately land on repairing the Going Merry, repairing the ship. And it's a very smart idea. Luffy, I think, proposes it. And what they say to this end, what they will need is a carpenter for the crew. It makes sense, the ship has been in dire straits for a long time, and Usopp, like you said, is not a handyman. They do need someone proper whose job it is, whose expertise it is to repair ships. So, makes sense that they want a carpenter. And someone else also says they want a musician. I'm not sure how serious that was, but we'll see. So there's potential for 1 or 2 more crew members as the crew gets larger and larger. I'm down for that. Definitely want to see more crew members, though I do worry a little bit, or not worry, but I'm just kind of curious, will things get more bloated in the future? Because there comes to a point where arcs do bite off a bit more than they can chew through covering too many perspectives, so I wonder if to counteract that, maybe Oda focuses purely on certain individuals and some others get even more relegated to the sidelines, or if he decides to focus on, a 10-man crew or something like that. I'm not saying it won't work, but I do see some pitfalls there, so just interesting. We'll see how Oda approaches it in the future. Now, at the same time, we cut to the Marine headquarters, and the officials there say that one of their most important officers is gone. And the 5 elders hear about this, and it's noted that this guy just does whatever the hell he wants. He's a free spirit. And this guy turns out to be someone named Admiral Aokichi, and he's riding this bike crossing an ocean, looking at Luffy's wanted poster. And he goes, man, there must not be an honest person in this family. Family? We got an allusion to Luffy potentially being related to Goldie Roger earlier. Is that what this guy's talking about? Could it be the D family, Goldie, Roger? Could it be Shanks? Could it be Ace that he's referring to? It could be either of those, because family need not be restricted to blood, right? Either way, someone with a history with people associated with Luffy in one way or another is searching for Luffy. Admiral Aokiji, excuse me. Admiral Aokiji. And he's an intriguing figure. I hope we see more about him. And this continues to show Oda's penchant for staggering plot threads and hooking you in with just little scenes about things that'll happen down the line. So this is another good one for Aokiji. But yeah, that is Skypiea. That is the end of Skypiea. The best end to any arc. Dare I say, the best arc. It is my favorite arc so far, and it saddens me that some people think this is, any people at all in the world, I know it's probably a small amount, but think this is filler or skip it, just because it doesn't contribute to the plot, because it does so much for the spirit and themes and all that Oda tries to achieve with the heart of One Piece. It's without it, there would be this huge hole in the story, I feel like. But those chapters, the flashback into the climax, like those, 15, 20 chapters, however many it was, 25, I don't know. They were something special. They were a masterful stretch. It was consistent brilliance for like 25, 30 straight chapters. It was crazy. And then this ends the saga. I don't really know how to rank the sagas because they each have their own peaks and their own draws. I would say probably, I don't know. It's really difficult. They all have their highlights. They all have some weaknesses here and there. But I would say that overall, this saga with Jaya and Skypiea is the most cohesive. It feels the most like one story from beginning to end, whereas the others feel a bit more separated. I think the introductory East Blue is a bit more integrative than the Alabasta saga with Vivi, but that one is, the through line in that one is Vivi's journey and her role in the crew, so it's more cohesive in a character focused perspective. I'm rambling now, but what I want to say is this third saga is the most cohesive thematically. It's the most comprehensive and I think overall poetic and best structured in that way. This arc had amazing stuff for Robin, Nami, Luffy. Great stuff for basically every member gets a little bit at least. Chopper had some great stuff this arc as well, but Wiper, Ganfer, Noland, Kalgara, those are all great new additions to the cast. Man, Noland, what an impact character. Kalgara as well, of course, but oh god. Enel was a cool villain as well. He had some cool moments. He was pretty solid, and he was good for the overall theme of the arc, and a bit different from the other One Piece villains. But this all just had such a beautiful, poetic, empowering, self-contained narrative that's so emblematic of this series, and it expands the world, it has some nice world-building details with technology and, the scope, and it adds this more epic, all-encompassing feel to the One Piece universe, to me at least. And Luffy was kind of relegated to the sidelines for the first 2/3 or so of the arc, but man does he come into his own in the last third, and consistently kind of show us why he, in my opinion, sorry for spoiling my character rankings, but continues to be the best character in this series. He still is the best character, and he's so honest of a character. Just through being who he is, he was able to bear so many dreams and be so kind and compassionate to so many people and inspire them. Again, like this force of nature that people pray for and hope for miracles, but he's not a miracle. He's just a boy, a man, and he is honest and he is who he is, and he will continue to be, and he will continue to inspire. And in the end, we've talked about so many themes throughout this arc: indoctrination, that alternate perspective, progress, everything. But ultimately, what I take away the most from Skypiea is the reward of dreams, of hoping for dreams. And it ties in with Jaya so cohesively. Some people have told me that they consider Jaya and Skypiea to be the same arc. I totally get why. And there's also a theme of understanding and how it can be reached between, like Noland and Kalgara, Wiper and Ganfer by the end, the Skypians and the Shandians, everyone. And the dynamic between Wiper and Cricket is actually really interesting because, with Cricket we have someone who kind of festers bitterness for his ancestor a little bit, for the pain it's caused him in past generations. Whereas Wiper, his ancestor, Kalgara, as opposed to Noland for Cricket, he completely honors him start to finish. And so these two are the descendants, the symbols of this inherited will from Noland and from Calgara. And even though they're apart, one is on the blue sea on the surface, one is in the clouds, they're nonetheless able to hear each other, find each other, to tell each other we are here. And Wiper learns of that through Luffy and how he carries forward Cricket's goal. And Cricket hears of it through the bell and through Luffy's shadow silhouette. And in the way that Noland and Calgara were so far apart from each other and seemingly couldn't reach each other or communicate, these two are as well, but now they can, and they can let each other know, we're here, we're okay, and we wish the best for you. And I find that really beautiful. Also, it was pointed out to me that Cricket continues the science theme, Wiper continues the tradition theme for their respective descendants or ancestors, which is really cool. But now for the character ranking, and there's been a bit of a shakeup. Some irregularities in the way that the order is, which I'm really happy with. Now, of course, like I said, Enel was a cool antagonist. I liked Pagaya as well. McKinley had some interesting stuff to his character too, but those ones don't really make the list. Or honorable mentions, they're kind of on the outskirts. But for the honorable mentions, we have Ganfer, Konis, Nojiko, Belmare, Zeph, and Calgara. 3 of those new characters, though all 3 of them are very good. I enjoy them a lot. And starting from the bottom, now I'm cheating a little bit because I have such a hard time deciding between these two. So for number 15, in what is actually a top 16, I have a tie between Sir Crocodile and Koza, both of whom continue to inspire the imagination, who are really good in differing ways. I think Crocodile is very interesting through some of the things brought up in the AJP's comments, and I think Koza is very emotional and offers a very needed perspective. So those two, I can't really decide between them for 15. Actually, that's a cop-out, isn't it? That's a cop-out. Hold on. Okay, I'll say Sir Crocodile's a little bit better than Koza. So Koza's an honorable mention, number 16, I guess you could say. Sir Crocodile, number 15, Mihawk, 14, Robin is 13, she's risen a bit, and I do want to point out that I think she has a high ceiling, but her approach has just been very gradual. Oda is definitely giving us the peripheries of her character and sort of kind of zooming in, very slowly honing in on the heart of who she is. And I love the gradual approach. I'm a big fan of it. I wouldn't have it any other way for her. And I'm glad that Oda's doing it, but it just means that I'm not hit in the face with an impact of, yes, Robin greatness, just yet. So she is maybe lower than she might be for some people, but yeah, she's my number 13. And I imagine she'll be much higher quite soon, as long as they keep exploring her. Hiriluk is number 12, Shanks is 11, and Noland is number 10. I think he's an amazing character. I think he's great. And he slots right in just above Shanks, number 10. Amazing impact character. Chopper would be number 9. And then I would say, yup, my favorite character in this arc, Wiper, number 8. I think he's a great character with some of the best moments, most emotional character moments of the series. And I think, like Koza, he offers that really great perspective, but has even more emotional resonance to him. He's such a flawed human character, and it's so interesting learning about him and seeing him come to understand that things were not all lost and that he could let go of his hatred in the way he did, and that there was salvation. It was really beautiful. So, Wiper, number 8. Sanji is still number 7. Smoker is still number 6. Zoro is number 5. Nami is number 4. Vivi's still hanging on by a thread to number 3, but I think she'll be usurped pretty quickly, maybe in the next arc or two, because she's not present anymore. But I do love me some Vivi, and she's still top 3. Usopp, number 2, and Luffy, number 1. So that's my ranking. Honorable mentions for Koza, Calgara, Zeph, Belmare, Nojiko, Konis, Ganfer, some of those characters, and the order is Sir Crocodile, number 15, 14 is Mihawk, 13 Robin, 12 Hiriluk, 11 Shanks, 10 Noland, 9 Chopper, 8 Wiper, 7 Sanji, 6 Smoker, 5 Zoro, 4 Nami, 3 Vivi, 2 Usopp, 1 Luffy. And one more thing, I'm super intrigued with Doflamingo. I really want to know what that guy's about. Also, this Aokiji guy, very interesting. We'll see what he's about later. Those two I have my eye on. I would love to see Smoker and Tashigi come back into it. Tashigi's also an honorable mention, I'd say. And what the hell happened to Dragon? He just dropped in to Logtown to say some cool shit and then just left. So You know, I haven't forgotten Dragon, but where is he? I don't know. But yeah, so that's what I got to say about the characters. That's what I got to say about this arc. For the next arc, I have no idea where it's going to go, but I would imagine it's going to be a shorter one. Maybe one that's more light in tone or not as expansive of a plot. Maybe one similar to Whiskey Peak is what I would guess, or maybe like a Reversed Mountain sort of arc. We'll see. But I do think for the sake of the story, we do need a shorter arc here. Maybe one that's a bit less emotional and dramatic, just for the sake of balance. We'll see. It all comes down to the execution, and I could be totally wrong. That aside, I have no idea where the story's going to go from here. No clue. But I'm along for the ride, and I don't know if I mentioned it properly. Skypiea is my favorite arc. It just is. That last third or so, the last 20-25 chapters, nothing in the series can beat that in terms of consistency. Some come close, you know. At this moment, if I rank the arcs, my top 5 arcs, it would be something like Skypiea, Alabasta, Orlong Park, Drum Island, Jaya, something like that. Roughly ordered. Maybe Jaya is higher than 5, but either way, that would be my ranking. And, you know, it's a slow start. But like I said from the beginning, that slow start is needed for an arc like Skypiea, which ingratiates this expansive world and this mythos. And could you imagine how lacking the payoff would be if Oda just rushed into Skypiea and didn't properly establish the culture that's been ingrained here, you know? I'm so glad that he had a slow start to this because the payoff was immense. I would give this arc a solid 9 out of 10. Solid 9 out of 10. It's my favorite One Piece arc so far. And it'll take something special to beat it, but I don't doubt that it could happen. Thank you for joining me so much for this review of this wonderful, wonderful arc. I hope you'll join me next time. If you want to see the next video right now, you can get early access through Patreon. I will be reviewing the next arc in that video, and I will also be reviewing the G8 anime filler arc, and the movie 6, Baron Omatsuri. I don't imagine that I'll have very long reviews for those, but I'll at least talk about my experience with them, because I am going to be watching them. So I'll recap that at the start of that video, and then go into the review. So if you want early access to that right now, you can do it through Patreon. $5 patrons have early access to the next video. If you want to follow my read-through on Twitch, you can do so by following me in the link below or in the description. And you can join the Discord, of course. And if you want your comment to be highlighted, don't forget to use the hashtag AJPiece so it can be potentially chosen for a future video. Thank you guys so much once again. It's been a pleasure, and I'll catch you next time. Many thanks for watching.